Hello everyone, welcome to this week's news and community spotlights. Are you ready for some awesome new assets? If so, you might be interested to hear August's free Unreal Engine Marketplace content has landed. This month's haul includes subterranean city environments, knights in armor, an RPG template, and more. As always, we're able to bring these products to you for free, courtesy of our talented creators over at the Unreal Engine Marketplace. Let's dive into the details. Stylized Nanite Dungeon Pack by Studio Kobo is a high-quality stylized asset pack that has everything you need to create a dank and dingy dungeon. With crumbling masonry, flickering lights, and the remains of unfortunate inmates, you'll find this pack offers more than 70 Nanite-compatible props to play with, alongside Niagara particle effects, a customizable flickering light function, post-process effects, and more. Download if you dare. Modular Asian Medieval City by ScaleX is an elegant Asian-inspired city environment, complete with a port, temple, streets, and interior. There's plenty to explore here. An urban city with beautiful bridges and cherry blossom trees, winding alleyways, and shrines surrounded by grassy plains. With modular buildings, walls, and roofs, plus a multitude of props and building interiors, you'll soon be busy crafting your own stunning town. Moore's RPG template by Moore Game Dev is a great help if you want to create a first or third-person fantasy RPG. This comprehensive template includes various gameplay system blueprints, props, animations, UI, and a sample character to get you up and running. Perfect for building an epic medieval high fantasy role-playing game from scratch. Skeleton Knight Modular by Buxoided is for those in need of something armed to the teeth, red-eyed, and very much dead. This set of modular skeleton knights will make a fantastic addition to horror and fantasy games. Mix and match armor, weapons, and clothing to customize the characters to your liking. You can even change the color of the clothing and armor, and adjust the level of dirt. Undercity plus Wonderland bundle by Snowy Train Market is a huge bundle that enables you to build two very different environments. The first is a futuristic subterranean city, all neon signs, iron pipes, and crumbling Victorian brickwork. The other is a surreal Wonderland castle complete with windmill, turrets, and forest. Over 100 unique static meshes, 135 materials and material instances, and 500 textures means there's more than enough to get stuck into. Remember to grab this month's content fast. It's only free until the end of August. And don't forget, you can always see the latest featured free marketplace offerings on the Unreal Engine sponsored content page. Have you heard about the latest in Unreal Editor for Fortnite? We've just released tools that allow you to make custom Fall Guys islands that you can easily share directly with players. If you're interested in learning more, make sure to check out the recent episode of Creating in Fortnite, where the team behind these tools sat down with us to walk through the process. You can find the full video on our YouTube channel at Unreal Engine. Interested in meeting some of your fellow developers? Here's a list of community meetups happening this month. Find one near you and enjoy. With all of that in mind, let's get into the community spotlights for this week. UE5 Antelope Canyon by Gal Ravid Tal is the stunning outcome of a masterful combination of Gaia, Unreal Engine 5, and Nuke. They wanted to challenge themselves by recreating their inspiration as close as they could, opting to use ray-traced global illumination to get as accurate lighting as possible. We think the end result was absolutely awe-inspiring, not just as a recreation, but all on its own. What do you think? Let them know at their art station, where you can also find more of their other work. Zrets by Lucas Fuchsa is a fierce, powerful, and unsettling example of a metahuman system with a custom sculpt and textures. You can see as this character goes through several facial animations, with impressive wrinkle maps assisting in bringing them to life, making for a very interesting breakdown process and an unforgettable end result. Make sure you also go check out their other work on their art station. Just a Peek by Miriam Frassoni is a gorgeous PBR stylized environment utilizing a series of new steps for its creator. From learning how to create a cleverly designed master material in Unreal with functionality such as materials with texture or resolution variation linked to the distance of the camera, to the use of virtual textures to blend with the landscape, to even general improvements of their composition and storytelling, they went above and beyond to make something magical. The project blends between both nanite-enabled meshes as well as classic low-poly meshes based off of necessity and look, with all textures hand-painted, using Photoshop for the foliage and Substance Painter for all other props. If you'd like to see a full behind the scenes of this adorable project, including in-depth videos and a myriad of breakdown shots, make sure to head to their ArtStation and give them some love. That's it for today's news and community spotlights. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Inside Unreal, a weekly show where we learn, explore, and celebrate everything Unreal. I am your host, Tina, and today with me I have some of the incredible members of our animation and rigging team that are going to be going over and demoing some of the really fun and exciting things that were added into the tools with 5.4, as well as talking about some other potential cool things that might be coming in the future. So we have a lot to cover. I'm not going to take too much time for myself because y'all are not here for me. You're here for these wonderful, incredible guests. So let's go ahead and start off the introductions here. Benoit, why don't we start with you? Tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Tina. So my name is Benoit Gadreau. I'm a senior animation programmer at Epic Games. I joined the rigging team about 3 years ago now. And since then, I've been working mainly on opening, skinning, and animation authoring in UE. And prior to this, I spent 14 years in the VFX industry, mainly working on skinning, rigging, animation, among other things as well.
Amazing. Perfect. So, in other words, you know what you're talking about. That's
Yeah.
what I'm hearing.
Sort of.
Next, Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
Yeah, hi, my name is Greg. I'm the senior technical product manager on the animation team, mostly focusing on IK retargeting and sequencer. I think I just passed my 4 years, so I've been here at Epic for 4 years. And before that, I was a pipeline TD in film, games, and doing all sorts of different commercials and just using UE all around. So yeah, super excited to talk about all the new features in 5.4.
Absolutely. Very excited to have you here. And then next up, we've got Helgi. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Helge. I had the control rig development, been at Epic for I think a bit more than 5 years now. Yeah, before that, I've mainly been involved with visual programming development. So I work at Softimage, work on ICE, if anybody remembers that. Work at a company called Fabric Engine, working sort of on a runtime that was outside of DCCs. And with all of these frameworks, I've always been involved in building rigging technology. So at Epic, we're basically merging all these different efforts into what is Control Rig today. Yeah, I'm super excited. I actually missed Unreal Fest Prague, so if anybody was waiting for my talk there, thank you, Chase, for delivering it. And finally able to talk about the tools we've been building in the last years. So yeah, excited.
Yes, lots of very, very cool stuff that y'all have been working on. And then last but certainly not least, Kieran, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself as well.
The full body IK solver, the retargeting tool set, and most recently the skeletal mesh editing software.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, with that, then I think we can just dive right into the content itself. Quick warning to everyone, my main monitor isn't working. So if I'm looking off to the side, it's because this is how I must be today. I'm so sorry. This is just the tech gods have decided this is my punishment. But I'll hand it back over to you, Karen. I know you're going to kick us off and take it away. Let's get into it.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce people to the skeletal mesh editing suite that shipped in 5.4. So I have here the third person template, and we're going to go through the process of basically replacing the character that you play as. So skeletal meshes in Unreal prior to, I think it was 5.3 when we very first introduced skeletal mesh editing, they've always been a really static thing. Like you just bring them in and that's it. If you need, there's a few modifications you can make in terms of like adding sockets, but for the most part, if you needed to make really structural changes to your skeleton or modify the weights, you were going all the way out to a DCC app and going through another, export import process to bring those changes back in. And that's obviously suboptimal. So we've been really focusing on how we can keep people in the engine, whether they're animating or setting up a character. We don't want you losing your flow state and wandering off to other software, especially for, minute little fixes and things that really you ought to be able to do right inside Unreal. So to get started, you'll notice if we open up the plugins, there's a plugin here called the Skeletal Mesh Editing Tools. So this is off by default. It's currently in beta in 5.4. We'll be moving into production ready for 5.5 and adding a lot of stuff to get it there. I'll talk about that as we go through it. But you will need to enable that manually for now and then restart your editor. And when you do that, you'll see a tool set available in the Skeletal Mesh Editor, as well as a ability to convert static meshes to skeletal meshes. So you can start right from scratch. I have here this little lizard guy that I downloaded off the Epic Marketplace, and I converted him to a static mesh. So this has no bones, completely unanimatable. Just it could be a brick wall, whatever. You'll see here in the right-click menu now, there's this option to convert to a skeletal mesh. So if you pop that open, you have some options here. You can create a new skeleton or use an existing one. And then you can sort of get some control over the root bone and how you want to prefix it, but you can, of course, just rename it however you want. When you do that, you'll get a skeletal mesh and a skeleton. And when you pop it open, if you have that plugin loaded that I was mentioning earlier, you'll get this new blue button here saying editing tools, right? So this gives you this toolbar on the side here with all the editing tools for modifying skeletal meshes. There's a lot of stuff here that I won't get into today, things for actually affecting the mesh, like you can kind of remesh things, simplify, weld. You can actually deform with the sculpting tools if you want. But we're gonna look at the sort of most crucial aspects of this, which is being able to add and edit the skeleton and then being able to connect your mesh to the skeleton with weights, right? So I could go in here and add bones to this guy, but I don't want to take too much time starting from scratch. So I have a version of him that's sort of half done. I need to exit out of Pi before I can activate the tool. Okay, so this is our guy. I kind of just ripped his left leg off, so it's if we play an animation here, you'll see the animation's fine, but his left leg's not moving. So this would be like where you would be if you're sort of 3/4 of the way done rigging him. But let's finish him off. I'm going to pop back to the rest pose. And the first thing we're going to do is create the skeleton for that leg. So I'm going to go into the Edit Skeleton tool. This is Benoit's baby. He did a really good job providing some tools that I think you'll be pleased with. If you have experience coming from other applications, it's usually just a matter of kind of placing bones manually and adjusting their location sort of by hand. But we have some pretty cool stuff. So if you go to the Add button here, we have this drop down where we can control how the bones are going to be placed into the scene. So by default, it's on within mesh, but I'll just demonstrate these real quickly. So this can be useful if you set it to camera plane. It'll basically just place the bones in the most orthogonal plane to wherever your camera is currently facing. That can be really helpful for getting a perfectly straight bone chain, and oftentimes characters are aligned to a main plane, so super helpful. You can also place bones on the mesh, so if we switch to that, can see here, those bones are sitting right on top of the mesh, sometimes useful. But for a leg, we really want the bones inside the mesh. So we're going to go for within mesh. And I'm going to place a hip, knee, ankle, and we'll give them a toe bone. Okay. Over. Okay. So with that, I'm happy with the number of bones. Their placement looks pretty good. We can go over to edit, and in the edit mode, you have access to your translate and rotate manipulator. So I can move these bones around. Notice that they're moving independently, so you can tune the bones without having to counter, translate, or rotate the children. I should also note that you can at any point reparent bones by just dragging them in the skeleton view. So we need the leg to actually be a child of the pelvis, just as the right hand leg is. So I'll just click and drag that under there. Okay, you can see that orange connection to its parent there indicates where it's parented. And if we want these joints to play nicely with Unreal's animation system, we need to name them appropriately. So I'm just going to go through this real quick. I_L, double clicking to rename them, calf L, foot L, and ball L. And now would be a good time to talk about the, broach the topic of orienting bones. So like placing bones will give you, what looks like basically a finished result, but there's another aspect to rigging that a lot of people maybe don't understand correctly, or it's kind of a hard thing for beginners to wrap their head around, but the actual local orientation of your bone really does matter. So you can see that when you click on a bone by looking at the translate manipulator, you can see which direction the primary axes are facing. And if I click on this on the right-hand side here, you can see that, Y is facing back and X is facing down the bone. By default, you're going to get something that's oriented to the world. So you really do want to always have a primary axis facing down the bone. And this allows you to have a clean rotation value, a single rotation value that twists the bone along its length. So if you don't orient your bones, basically you're going to have a bad time. You're not going to have a clean single rotation value that corresponds to the twist axis. So we have is there a question?
Yeah, sorry, Kieran, to intercept. Actually, it was a question about 10 seconds ago, but I figured I might as well ask it now. You can feel free to answer whenever it's appropriate. As I was watching you rename things from, joint 1 to thigh-L, calf-L, etc. Quick question, is this stuff accessible in Python? And can you sort of, because I know that many people working in Maya and other DCCs have written their like renamers and all sorts of tools. Is this something you can do here as well?
Yeah, good question. There is a Python and Blueprint API for all of the operations that you'll see here today in the edit skeleton and edit weights tools. We did want to make sure that we don't, we want to provide a good foundational tool set, but we also recognize that a lot of professionals really do have their own workflows and want to be able to customize that, and they might have crazy skeletal configurations that require a lot of automation. So yeah, I can I don't know how we get that information out, but I can point anyone who's interested to the relevant APIs there. There's a modifier for both the skeleton and the weights.
I think there's a dev community page where there are some code snippets about that.
Yeah, it's a really nice API actually. We took our time to make sure that it's fairly straightforward. Like you essentially create an object that is attached to your skeletal mesh, make a bunch of operations. You can add, remove bones, rename, reparent, modify weights, whatever you need, and then you kind of commit that at the end. So you could build up any kind of UI around that, whatever you want.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. So on the topic of orientation, I'm not going to go through and orient this stuff fully, but we'll hit this orient button, and that's going to send the primary axis, in this case positive X, down the bone. So at least we have a nice twist axis. And then if you wanted to, you could go through and switch to your rotate tool and kind of orient the secondary axis. So typically you want, when you're rigging characters, to have a, the primary axis pointing down the bone, so you have twist, but then there's also usually two axes that you want for your character's limb to move. Like you want to be able to splay your arms with a single rotation value, and then swing your arms with a separate rotation value. And so if you have your axes sort of lined up in this way, where there's one pointing straight to the side and then one pointing straight back, not like this, where they're kind of halfway in between, then you'll have a nice clean rotation value for all of the relevant degrees of freedom. Sorry if I'm lingering on orientations, but they really do matter a lot. So there's another point, is that it's often helpful to have them mirrored. So like if I have on the right hand side here Y facing back and Z out, I might want the same Y facing back and Z out on this side. And then the same rotation value will have the same effect on the left and the right knee, instead of going in opposite directions. I think I'm just going to leave this for now. I will point out though that you have full control over the orientation, not just through the rotate manipulator, but also down here you can zero things out, which is really helpful for tip bones. There's also the ability to cycle into world space, and if I zero that out, then you'll see I get a nice clean world space orientation. So whether it's directly manipulating the numbers or just tuning it by hand, you have full control over your bone orientations. And I'm just going to accept that. So when you hit accept, the changes that you've made to your skeletal mesh are committed to the asset, and you'll notice the little star comes up here on your asset. So it's been dirtied, and if we wanted to keep those changes, you'd have to actually save. But if we play an animation now, you'll notice that, hey, those bones aren't affecting the leg at all. So this is the part where we need to start editing the weights to attach those bones to the mesh and tell the mesh how to actually be affected by those new bones. Any questions before I move on? Oh.
Yes, there's a couple that came up that I can toss your way super quick before you move on.
Sure.
Main one that I saw that I want to make sure I tackle real quick is someone's wondering if they use the skeletal editor tools to modify an existing SKM or SK. What happens to those edits if the source asset, such as an FBX, is re-imported?
They will be gone. So we do not currently support merging. Well, there is sort of a limited ability to merge bones, but it's kind of brute force. What we would recommend that is if you do need to keep your source outside of Unreal, you can export an FBX and update your source outside of the engine to reflect the changes that you made in the engine. But the hope is going forward that eventually the engine really should just be digesting static meshes, and the bulk of, or the entirety of your rigging would take place in engine. That's the ideal that we're aiming for, at least.
Yeah. That actually flows really well into the next question I have for you, which is, would you consider this more as a workflow for making small adjustments, or as a way to completely replace sections of workflow from outside software such as Maya, etc.?
I think it's both. We're definitely aiming for a full replacement of the functionality that you find in outside packages. And while I think what you're seeing here in 5.4 is certainly sufficient for simple assets like what we have here, there are some features that we're currently developing and will be coming out in 5.5 that I think will kind of coax people over who are maybe apprehensive about losing their favorite thing in Maya. I'll call out some of those things as we go through skinning, but yeah, like the goal here is to build a production ready sort of professional grade tool set that you can use to skin any character from scratch.
Very nice. All right, I have two other super quick ones, and then I'll let you get back into it. Can orientation be edited after the commit?
Only by going back into the tool. and editing the orientation and then recommitting. So not really, I mean, yeah, yes, but only by going through the flow again.
A yes, but yes. And then last one I have for you for right now is how is the animation aware of the newly added bones?
Great question. It is not aware. So the animation that we currently are looking at here, it was authored on the leg that I nuked before the live stream here. And so those rotation values that are recorded on those bones for each frame of that animation are really only meaningful to the orientations that they were originally authored on. So if we change the orientations as we did, you know, whereas before rotation positive X might have splayed the leg outwards, now maybe it's twisting it or whatever. The animation can come out looking like nonsense, and that's where it's really critical to have a robust retargeting tool set. So, I mean, I could go through and meticulously adjust the orientations to match what the animation's expecting, or we can use a retargeter, which I'll show you later, to basically adapt the animations to the new skeleton. But I think maybe what you were getting at is like, if I add a bunch of bones, say to add some articulation maybe to these things on his back, the animation's not going to have any knowledge of those bones whatsoever. They won't be animated. They'll just be left alone. They'll be static. But if you change bones that are animated, that are recorded in animation, you better make sure that the orientations are identical, or else the values that the animation is going to put on your skeleton will be kind of random nonsense, right? They might not make any sense.
Right. Interesting. All right. We're still collecting questions from chat, so if y'all have more, please don't hesitate to toss them in there. But for now, I'll hand it back over to you to continue your stuff you were showing us.
Well, thanks, Dina. Okay, so let's skin that leg up. I'm going to drop into the edit weight section. I do want to briefly mention some of the tools in here, especially bind skin. So bind skin is really cool. This, I'm just going to shut the animation off. This is used to basically create weights for the entire body. And typically it's something that you would do as a first pass. So if you want to get a leg up on setting up weights without having to do everything manually, there are some options here. There's two methods. One is the direct distance, which basically binds every vertex to the closest bone. And the other is geodesic voxel. I've had a lot more luck with the voxel method. The way this works is it's going to voxelize your character, and then the bones are embedded in the voxels and they bleed their weight out in sort of a volumetric way into the surrounding cubes. And so you get kind of a more spatially aware initial bind rather than direct distance, because direct distance can mess up in a lot of ways. Like, for example, like if we imagine a vertex on his armpit, it might be closest to this bone than it is to the spine where it actually belongs. And so you can't really rely on simple direct distance in most cases. But anyway, that's your initial bind. Definitely check that out and play with it. It can really accelerate your workflow. But the edit weights tool is the bread and butter. This is where you get full control over every vertex and the weight assigned to it. And this will be sort of the bulk of your skin editing will happen in here. So you'll notice when we pop it open, your character will turn a jet black and you'll see a wireframe. So if you select bones, you're going to see the weights assigned to that bone. It looks like the leg that we just rigged up is fully assigned to the pelvis. Okay. Now the tool itself is broken up into three main sections. You've got the brush interface, which you can use to brush directly on the mesh. You've got this vertices method, which allows you to go in and select vertices and assign and edit the weights directly per vertex. And then you've got a bones method, which allows you to go in and select bones and move it around. So you can see moving the thigh bone right now does nothing because it's not assigned any weight.
Can I point something out real quick that I really liked when I was prepping my content? The vertices tool or vertices section has a flood method that you can use to do rigid binds. So you select one vertex of a piece of, like, you know, robot or something like that. You hit flood and it will select all the connected vertices. And in my demo later, you'll see the two mechanical pieces that are rigged up all using that method. That was really fun.
Yes, that's a great point, Helgi. Flooding can really accelerate mechanical rigging. So mechanical rigging is any rig that doesn't have a blend, like where you just have parts that aren't meant to bend at all. And in that case, you can usually get away with basically selecting a part, say it's like a wheel on a bicycle or something, flood it to select the whole wheel, and then click add with the bone selected for that wheel, and it'll, assign the wheel to that bone. So rigging mechanical stuff is really just a matter of selecting, flooding, assigning, selecting, flooding, assigning, and you go through and basically assign chunks of your mesh to different bones, and then you're done. Things get a little bit more complicated when you're doing a character with skin, because you don't want them moving rigidly. You want them to have some bend, like Gumby. So let's go through and see what that looks like. I'm going to actually do a rigid bind on this leg first, and then we'll smooth it out. So in vertex mode here, I'm going to marquee select a bunch of vertices on the bottom of the leg. I'm just going to try and get that loop of vertices that goes all the way around. That would be a good time actually to talk a little bit about the viewport render that you're seeing here. So you'll notice there's a lot of kind of noise as I move the camera around with this wireframe. We do have a new wireframe rendering mode that's coming out in 5.5, which I think really improves the experience of doing mesh edits in Unreal. So look forward to that, but this is serviceable for now. Okay, so I have this bottom of the leg selected. I'm going to hit grow. And so the way grow works is it's just going to look at all the selected vertices and find any that are connected to those selections and add those to the selection. Okay, so we're just going to grow that all the way up to the top of the leg. And basically I have a nice selection here for the whole leg. With the thigh L bone selected, I'm going to use the add button and add a full amount of 100%. Okay, so I basically assigned all those vertices 100% to the thigh bone. So this is kind of a rigid bind, right? Now what I'm going to use is shrink. So shrink is going to take those vertices on the edge of your selection and remove them. I'm going to shrink my selection back down. I think maybe a little bit more. So right there. And now we have a good selection of the bottom part of the leg. I'm going to assign that fully to the calf. So select the calf bone, add. Let's shrink it down some more to the foot bone. Select the foot bone, hit add. And I'm just going to marquee select those toes and add those to the ball. Okay. So at this point, we have a rigid bind on this character. And if we switch to bones mode and start posing, you're going to see why you don't want to do rigid binds on smooth characters. If you bend your leg and it looks like this, you should probably go to a doctor. Something is very wrong.
Thank you. Official health advice there, yes.
Yeah. But I do recommend actually starting from a rigid bind. It's a good place to kind of get started. Okay, so I'm gonna just like stretch this guy out. This is a technique that I use. Obviously, people have their own way of working, but I like starting with a rigid bind, stretching it out, and then just brushing some relaxation to smooth out the joints. So I'm switching over to the brush mode now, which has two modes of fall off. There's the surface fall off and volume. Let me just demonstrate those really quick because they're pretty important. If I crank the strength up, actually switch to add mode, and we're in volume. So volume is going to look at the sphere, the size of that green circle, and affect any vertices that are in that sphere. So if I'm in the armpit here and I click to add, it's going to affect quite a few vertices, probably some that I don't want. If I use surface mode, it's going to go along the surface of the mesh using the geodesic distance. So if there's a big curve in the mesh, like under a armpit, and you want to be, you don't want to be affecting vertices in a straight line distance. So typically just leave it at surface unless you have a reason not to. Anyway, let's smooth this guy out. So we'll relax. I'm going to adjust the radius here and start painting. And you can immediately see those vertices start to smooth out a little bit. Okay. Good. Switch to the calf. Start smoothing that out. You can definitely smooth too much. You know, it depends on the style of character that you're building, but might have been wiser for me to start with a lower strength. Take the radius down on that brush.
Kieran, quick question for you, if
Certainly.
you don't mind. Is there any way to potentially change the color of what you're selecting as well? Is that a capability that we have?
Yeah. So, you mean the color feedback of the weights?
Yeah, right. Like how it's white there. I
Mhm.
just know for some people it might be difficult to be able to see. So I was curious if that was something that they could actually change for themselves as well.
Yeah, you don't have a lot of options in 5.4, but we did buff this up a lot in 5.5. So in 5.4, you can create a custom fall off ramp. So in this case, it's going to go from black to blue to yellow to white at full. You could change this to red, for example, to make kind of like a heat map. In 5.5, we actually have the ability to view the weights on all the bones simultaneously. So it'll create a random color for each bone that's unique relative to the bone's neighbors. So you can see kind of like all the region blending happening at once. But in 5.4, you've got a blend between a min-max, which you can specify, or you can customize it with a color ramp. I should also mention, when you pull your leg apart like this, you're going to want to reset it. So you can just right-click and reset selected bone transforms. And we can kind of just take a look at what that looks like now. So when we bend, you know, it's looking a lot smoother. We could probably even relax that a little bit more, start activating a little bit of this up here. Bring that strength down and just get a little bit of effect way up there, right?
Very nice. Is there any way that we could change that from white to like anything else?
Yeah, certainly. Is it not showing up on the stream?
It is. It's just a little bit difficult to see the, especially where it's blending. There we go. How does that chat? Does that feel a little better?
Very nice. Very nice. I thought there was no wires left where it's white, so.
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning too, in 5.5, we really took a hard look at the viewport experience in Unreal. You know, Unreal's been primarily about visualizing the look of assets that have already been set up elsewhere, not really so much editing, especially mesh editing. And so we've implemented a couple things that really help with the issues that you're seeing here. The first thing you'll notice is when you enter into a skin weight editing context in 5.5, we will switch to a completely different viewport mode that goes gray in the background with a grid on the floor rather than this box that can kind of get in your way sometimes. The wireframe rendering is much improved. It's way smoother. It's semi-transparent. So whereas here it really gets kind of it blows out quite a bit in dense areas where there's just a lot of wires sort of competing for very few pixels. And yeah, I think the viewport experience is something we know is not ideal. It's not what you're expecting if you're coming from a DCC, but it is getting improved rapidly. And you know, I think in 5.5 we're at a really good place. You could download it off GitHub and check it out if you want. But yeah, we're aware it's less than ideal.
To just ask more on the experience, are there I know there's like a bunch of hotkeys that you all have added to, right?
Yeah, hotkeys are ongoing for sure. We're also working with the UX team to think about ways that we can express what hotkeys are available in different contexts, because unlike other DCCs, like the workflows in Unreal are very context specific. and so we're thinking some sort of viewport overlay or something might be beneficial there, but that's kind of up in the air still. Speaking of Unreal 5.5, I can go into a little bit more detail about things you can expect to come in the future. So we do have the ability to mirror weights. It's been improved significantly in 5.5. There's now a more robust method of searching for mirrored vertices, and it's a little bit faster. The average operation now has a slider, so you can average your weights gradually or by a little bit amount, which is really nice. The component editor here is available when you select a vertex. It's going to show you the exact proportion of weights that are available on that vertex. You can click and drag to adjust the weight here, and you'll see the other influences are reacting. Now, that's because each vertex needs a total value of 1. It needs to be normalized, so you can kind of gain a sense of like, when I'm taking weight away from the thigh, where is it going? In this case, there's only one other influence, so it's all going onto the calf. But hopefully it gives people a better intuitive sense of what normalization is doing under the hood. There's a prune feature here, so this will take a selection of vertices and basically remove all influences on them that fall below this threshold value. So if you find that you have little influences kind of that are causing issues, maybe where they don't belong, prune can be a really helpful thing to get rid of all that. The component editor can be a little bit slow in 5.4, so there's been a lot of performance improvements poured into that. But by and large, if you get familiar with this interface, you're going to be right at home going into 5.5. So I think with that, we can basically call the skinning done. Just hit accept. Now, I doubt that I got the orientations right, so I try to play an animation on this guy. Yeah, it's going to look a little bit messed up. No problem. Let's get him into the retargeter and see what we can do to get some animation on him.
Yeah, quick not question, but note about skinning. So the great thing in here as well is that you can edit weights in context as well. So as you are painting weights, you can play animations. So you can see the deformer live. You don't have to accept your changes and then play the animation. So
totally.
Just something.
Yeah, you have your full timeline here. Now, of course, these animations aren't compatible with the orientations that I have on my legs, so we're gonna get some gibberish. But assuming you had an animation that is correct for your skeleton, then yeah, you can absolutely go in here and brush away on your weights and see the effect. In 5.5, we've improved this even further by allowing you to pipe a pose from a running Pi session into the Skeletal Mesh editor, so you can actually see the weights on your character as they are in game, and using the poses that are happening in game, which can be a blend of multiple animations and procedural adjustments and stuff that can kick up weight bugs that are kind of hard to reproduce otherwise. Thanks for that, Benoit. Okay, so let's do a retarget real quick. I'm gonna find an animation on this guy, right click and hit retarget animations. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about retargeting and the changes that went into 5.4. There's been a complete rewrite, more or less, of the retargeting window. You'll remember in prior versions of Unreal, there's 2 viewports. We've merged that down to 1 viewport and simplified it so that you just supply a source skeletal mesh and a target. So we're going to go from the original character, the target, which was the one that we just set up. And you'll see now when we play animation in the retargeter is taking into account the fact that those bone orientations are now different and is transferring the animation correctly. So that kind of gives you an indication of, an idea of what it is that the retargeter is doing. It kind of, compensates, if you will, for changes in orientation. It can also compensate for different numbers of bones, the different named bones if you set it up manually. But yeah. So from here we could export an animation and batch export if you want to select a bunch of them. Okay, so here we're looking at the leg that we just painted playing an animation now. That's cool. But let's replace the character that we have in the third-person template here with this guy, so we can run around as him. So there's this new option.
Just a quick question, Kieran. The reason why that character works, right, is because of how it follows the existing templates of the skeletons that we provide, right?
Oh my, I didn't even mention templates. Yep. Okay, so why did this work? That's a really good point, Greg. Sorry, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself.
No, all good.
So starting in 5.4, this tool will auto characterize your skeleton. So if you send a source skeletal mesh and a target skeletal mesh that the system recognizes, it will be able to automatically in the background in memory set up a retargeting asset that will be able to transfer animations between them. And this works based on templates. So you can see here it's printed out that it's using the UE4 mannequin template for the source and the target. And the reason that worked is because we named our bones according to that convention. We ship with support for, I want to say, like maybe a dozen different conventions. So all the popular skeletons that are out there in the wild are compatible with this. You'll be able to auto characterize things from skeletons from Mixamo, popular mocap solutions like Xens, Vicon. I'm forgetting all the others, but if your favorite skeleton isn't supported here, just reach out and we can add support for that. But essentially the idea is that we want common skeletons that people are using to quote unquote just work. So you bring it in here, it should be able to recognize that, oh, this is a Mixamo. I'm going to create, this is what the left leg should be. This is what the right leg should be. Now, it doesn't have to match perfectly. In this case, it did, so we didn't get any warnings. But, if, for example, it was only 90% UE4 mannequin and had some custom stuff on it, you would see some warnings here. And it would still work to the extent that it could, but you might, check the warnings here if you have custom skeletons that are coming in with things that the templates don't understand. So yeah, is there any questions about, or did I cover everything, Greg? I mean, about templates.
Yeah, you covered templates, and I think I saw a question that like not only can you export out animations, but you can actually export out the retargeter assets. So
yes,
if you do want, like, say for example, like you want to do some additional edits on top of that, you can export the actual retarget assets and then use that for any sort of edits, or what I'm assuming you're going to show is the runtime retarget.
Yeah, exactly. So when you have auto generate checked on, it's going to create a retarget asset for you in the way I just described. If you check that off, you can of course always use a custom retarget asset, perhaps with custom retarget poses for adjusting the motion however you want. But we'll go with the auto generated method and export some retarget assets. So it's going to kick out three things. We'll get a IK retargeter, a IK rig for the target, and an IK rig for the source. So if I pop open that retargeter and just adjust the offset so we can see both our characters side by side. Now in this case, they're identical except for the bone orientations that I messed up on the left leg. But from here you can preview results. You could edit the retarget pose to adjust the motion if you want, or do really all the things that we're not going to go through IK retargeting right now, but there's a massive suite of motion editing possibilities here. But this asset also then can be used to retarget at runtime. So if you want to do a runtime retarget, you need to create an animation blueprint for your character. I'm going to call this ABP runtime retarget. And there's just one node you got to put in here. That's the retarget pose from mesh. We're going to assign that retargeter. Can I drag it in here? I can't. Perfect. And hook up the output pose and compile. Looks good. So the way retarget pose for mesh works, it's going to copy a pose on the main thread before the animation is even evaluated from a source skeletal mesh. So it's copying a pose from a completely different skeletal mesh. It could be from, you know, the UE5 mannequin, or it could be from a tiger or whatever. Like it's from a completely different mesh. And then it's going to run it through the retargeter that you've specified here and output a retargeted pose. So this simple little setup here basically allows you to copy animation from other characters and then just utilize that directly. You can, of course, insert any other anim node here. This is just, you know, regular anim blueprint, but for our purposes, just a straight transfer should be fine. So I'll compile that. And then we need to add our character to the third person blueprint. Okay, so if we look in the third person blueprint, here's the mesh for the main character. I'm going to add another skeletal mesh and set it as a child. Okay. We're going to assign the guy that we just rigged up. Cool. And find that blueprint. Make sure he's running that retargeting blueprint. Okay, so there we go. He's now matching the pose of the mannequin. And the only thing we have left to do now is just hide the mannequin so we don't have both of them visible. Oop. Let's hide the mannequin. There we go. And something to be aware of, I think you do want always tick pose and refresh bones, or at least always tick pose on when you're hiding your source, just because Unreal will optimize it away if you don't. So with that, we should be able to compile, play, and working. Should be running around. Let's take a look. Greg, did you see anything I missed?
Not that I saw. Maybe just recompile and save. Because I don't think the asset's saved. Unless if
Let's double check everything's set up right. Find the retargeter. And use attached parent to grab the source pose. Give that a save. Weird, it's like it took the first pose. It's not in the reference pose.
Did you set up the component so that it actually copies from the right source, or is it automatically taking the parent?
It should automatically take the parent.
Okay.
is the source
wonder if it's-
evaluating correctly?
Oh, maybe not.
Shouldn't the parent
It
also
both-
take animation, not just pose?
Possibly. Oh, there we go. It was
Hey.
the setting that I thought I put on, but I didn't. Always tick and refresh bones. So there's a lesson for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because like I said, if it's hidden, it just won't get ticked. Okay, so there we're using the auto-generated retarget pose retargeter running through retarget pose from mesh on a skeletal mesh with a character, or a skeletal mesh with a leg we skinned up in engine. We could have skinned the whole thing starting from a static mesh, but I want to take 4 hours because I'm slow. But yeah, if there's unless there's any other questions, that's the overview of the skeletal mesh editing and auto retargeting in Unreal 5.4.
Before we go into questions, I'd like to add two things that I tried to shut up because I interrupted you too many times already. One, you know, as you said, we're aiming for replacing this workflow for skinning, but because there's Python exposure to everything, it does mean that there's not sort of barrier for studios or small teams to enter if they've written like their own custom skinning tools, because that's what I found many of the customer conversations. You know, it's hard to leave like an external ECC because for these workflows, because we have all this R&D investment we want to sustain. And yes, you know, you sort of have to redo some of that, but if you've written your own math logic to distribute weights across the mesh, you can absolutely replicate the same things in Unreal now. with this. The second thing I want to mention is that if because this character has these I don't know what to call them, these things on his back that don't yet have bones, and they're also not going to get animation, not even from the retargeter, I suppose, because there's no animation that goes with those. This would be a good segue to use control rig, for example, to generate secondary animation or things like that. So the animation graph that you've just been showing could be extended with nodes that add procedural animation to bits that may not be coming from the retargeter because there's no source animation from them, right?
Yes, exactly. So the way a lot of productions set up their retargeting is the base skeleton's kind of the most bare bones, simple version of a character in the game. And then for each variant that they might be retargeting to, there could be all kinds of custom animated bits and bobs that are added after the fact. So yeah, absolutely. It's sort of the start of your animation, by no means the end of it.
Yeah, and that same
Nice.
method is exactly what the Fortnite team does with all of their cosmetics.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very cool. All right, I have just a couple quick questions for you that I'm pulling from chat here. One of them is, through this whole process, are there any tools that do checks and validations on things like bone naming, orientations, etc., so you can be confident that what you set up is compatible with Unreal Skeleton?
Great question. Part of the sort of long tail of development that we have in mind for this tool set is to really improve the validation. Currently, there isn't any. So you can, delete bones that are animated, as you saw with this guy where I nuked his leg, and the tool's not going to stop you. It's kind of, we're assuming at some point that the user with this way it's currently set up, you kind of have to know what you're doing. And you can definitely get in a situation where you break things. Like it's pretty easy to nuke a bone that's important for animation purposes. Now in the future, I think there is a lot of space here to do auto validation. One of the big things that I would like to get in is the ability to basically automatically generate a skeleton from a known template. So, 99% of the time, you're probably going to be using the UE4 mannequin template. And I think at some point in the future, we're probably going to end up in a place where you auto fit a template skeleton to your character as a starting place so that the bone names are taken and orientations are more or less taken care of. And then we can start layering in validation to like give you warnings if your bone orientation is not looking good, or if there's a missing bone or something's named incorrectly. Yeah, I think those things are going to be really crucial going forward. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in a kind of similar vein to that, there was a question here of, do you have top 5 settings to look for in case something is broken? So we have a quick reference list to try and troubleshoot with.
I guess, are we talking about skeletal mesh editing specifically?
I think it might just be like certain settings to check that are either turned on or off, just something that might be small and is easy for them to accidentally miss that might be throwing a wrench into things.
When it comes the things that hang me up on skeletal mesh editing is probably like just making sure that you're working on the bone that you think you're working on. I pop it open here. Gotta get out of Pi. The brush operations all operate based on your currently selected bone, and sometimes when you're getting in the flow, it can be, you can end up in a place where you think you're painting on one thing, but you're not. You're painting on a different bone or whatever. So just that can take a little bit of getting used to. If you screw things up really badly, you can always cancel out and get out of it. So you don't have to be too trepidatious when you're modifying things. I don't know. I can't really think of any like real gotchas. Like the big things are like what I really tried to drill down into, like making sure that your bone placement is good and your orientation is quote unquote correct, or whatever that means for your animations. It provided that you do that, you can always just tune your weights to your heart's content, and you should be fine.
All right, very nice. So go free and experiment is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, even if you accept weights that you don't like, there's always, reloading the asset. I don't know if people know that, but you can right click and reload your asset to go right back to whatever's on disk. Even if you save it, hopefully you're working in Perforce or some other revision control system. So, yeah.
Awesome.
All of the actions support and the redo as well.
Yeah,
Most
we
tools.
did work very hard to make sure that everything you do in terms of editing skeletons and weights is a transaction, so it will show up in the undo queue, and you should be able to undo, redo everything without any issues.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's all I'm going to toss at you for now. Like I said, we're still collecting all y'all's questions. We're going to have a longer Q&A section at the tail end of the stream as well. So keep tossing those questions our way. But I think that's it for now.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Okay, so next up, I believe Helgi. We were going to toss it off to you now, right? So it's the kind of the next more or less part of the process.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. Whenever you're ready to show my screen, Dan, let me know. Where else, let me know when it's on.
There we go. Got it pulled up.
Good. Great. So let me start this and then can get into it. Sadly, as you can see here, we're looking at a scooter. We're not looking at that little fellow that Kieran was using for the demo. My explanation is, well, he built the content after I built mine, but it would be cool to sort of have a demo where we have a flow through it. We do have a bipod in the demo, so we'll get there. But first, I want to just talk a bit about why we've been doing this, and why there's a new modular rigging toolset. So we'll take a look at modular rigging, a new approach that we've added for setting up character rigs inside of Unreal as of 5.4. We used to have just control rig as the node graph, so the low-level system, and that is still there, and that's super important. It was built as a foundation for the character rigging system, but it's a very technical tool set. Modular rigging aims at making setting up characters for animation less technical, faster and fun. So a lot of bold words, and we'll see how far we can get with this. So one of the questions to ask when I started on this is really get to know the system. If you've ever worked on sort of a larger production, or if you create animation in a small group, I'm sure you no doubt you came across a rigging system somewhere. DCCs like Blender and Maya offer these out of the box, sometimes as plugins, sometimes out of the box with a package. And there tends to be a myriad of options. So you some of them ones you may be familiar with, such as M-Gear, Baguette, Advanced Skeletal, many other ones. So do we really need another one, right? Well, first of all, we didn't have one in Unreal, so yes, we need one here. Secondly, though, most of these systems are constrained by the environment they're in. And because Control Rig is quite flexible in comparison to many of the DCCs and their sort of animation runtimes, we figured that this is an opportunity to improve on that front as well. So before we start, I want to take a look at how to rig a bipod character. I know this is sort of the common case in most of our videos and documentation focus on this case, so I won't spend too much time on that. But the number one use for rigging systems are bipeds and humanoid characters. I've picked a character from the Paragon dataset that is available in Epic Marketplace, mainly because Decker felt like a good choice since she has a weapon. So you'll see that she has a weapon that is kind of custom, and I want to rig up the bipod first and then take a look at how we would do some of that weapon rigging. So let's start with that. I'll switch to my Unreal project. Can somebody give me a confirmation this is still up? I suppose we're still streaming.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah,
Still
Great.
going.
Thank you. All right. So if you have your skeletal mesh ready, like the one that Kieran just built in the previous demo, you can, as of 5.4, you can right click on the skeletal mesh and say create control rig, and you can also now create a modular rig for it. So both of those are control rigs. It's just the way that you build them is slightly different. So I'll actually create an old school by now control rig, and that will bring you into sort of this view where you have the node graphs and you can you can build up all the logic. So there's nothing in here yet, of course, but there's a forward sol that will take the animation data and put that on the bones. But because it's empty, there's nothing here yet. But just to remind people, this is where you would build up all your logic. But this is the previous very granular graph. And the new system that we built allows you to use what we call modules, so pre-made pieces. Let's go ahead, create a modular rig. So first of all, this looks quite different to the one that the editor we've looked at before. There's no node graph. Also, there's already the character in here with something set up. So you can see there's what we call the root module in here already. The root module is the module that is automatically placed and connected to the root bone. There's one that we ship, but you can set up your own root modules and change the default root module in the project settings so that all your characters are set up that way. On the top left, you see the module assets available in the project. So I'll switch this to tiles so we can see a couple more. I know that my text is really small, so I want to point out there's a couple of ones here that we ship by default. So where there's the spine, foot, finger, arm, all the ones you see here, and there's some that relate to the scooter and other parts of the demo that I built and added. So this list may not look exactly the same in your projects. On the bottom left, you have the modular hierarchy. This is where you see all your modules and the way they resolve to the character. On the right, you have access to the details of those and the full rig hierarchy as well, if you wanted to sort of check out all the bones that exist and so on. So we'll get into each of these views throughout the setup. So I'll start by setting up the first module after the root. So the way I'll do it, there's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but I like to use the viewport. So in the modular rig editor, you'll see these little nodes that hover over the character. They're called sockets, and I can drag the spine, drag it into the view, and connect it to the socket. So what that will do is we'll basically set up the module and automatically connect it to all the things that it recognizes within the character. So you see that basically the module shows up here now. We can see that it's figured out that the spine ends at spine 3 and it starts at spine 1, and it's also decided to parent the controls a certain way. So if you scroll down all the way, you can see the control structure it built. So down here you can see it's built the global control as part of the root, and then it started building up the spine controls there as well. So I can already now start posing the character and try it, but you can see it's missing a bunch of things. You can't really do much yet. And I also want to point out 2 hotkeys that you can also, I believe you can see them up here. Actually, we can't see them. We can see one here. So you can hide and toggle the schematic viewport using Y, and you can toggle the controls using T. So you can sort of go back and forth between what you need for what you need there. So I'll carry on with adding more modules on the left side of the character. The first thing I'll add is a shoulder up here, and then I'll add the arm onto this side. Then I'll add the leg, and I'll also add the foot on the left side. So this is now built out all the controls I may need to pose the character for the left side. Of course, there's fingers and more, but I'm not going to get into these for this demo to keep things a bit shorter. What I will do though is I will rename these. So I'll call this shoulder _L, arm L, leg L, and foot L. Next, I'm going to select all of these and right click and say mirror. And for the naming, I'm going to say replace _left with _right. So now we'll have built the other side of the character out using the same naming structure. So if you look at the controls that got built and the way they're hooked up, this is what it built. So correctly named all the way through for the legs and the arms. And again, I can pose, of course, each one of them. You can try that. So that's great. The last thing that we're missing is the neck. So I can do that as well. But on here, that will set up the head and remaining things. And so now at this point, even though it's a basic rig, I've hooked up the biped, toggle the schematic view just to try it. So hooked up the biped with the modules that we ship with, and sort of as a sort of a demo to see. I don't know, while talking over it probably took like 3 minutes. If you were going to do this, even with functions and things you built in the graph, it'd easily take much longer. And of course, also the sort of target user that we're trying to build this for is not the AAA technical rigor. We consider sort of our user base, the main sort of types of users being the technical person that may build the modules and may build fully in the graph, and a bit less technical person, or the person that doesn't like to go back to graphs because it's faster, and builds things using modules this way. So typically, in a team you may have maybe one super technical person and a couple of people setting up the characters, and they don't necessarily have to be mass whiz and know how quaternions work. That's always sort of the barrier of entry. Great. So now the second step, or the second thing I wanted to do, is take a look at the weapon. I'm not going to actually rig the whole weapon up. I just want to show you how you'd carry on with something that's rather custom. So for this guy here, you can see that further down here, there's this weapon that's already been set up. Currently, in the bone structure, it's parented to the hand. So if I move the hand around, you can see how that's following. But I can start adding more modules here. Now, the way you would do this, there's a couple different ways of doing it. I'll show you one that I like to use for this particular character. So if we go under the right hand, you'll notice that there's a weapon somewhere. Let me see where that is. There we go. So there's a weapon bone. I'll go ahead and show the bones for the character so you can see where that is. So this is where the root of the weapon is. There's also another bone here, which is sort of at the staff top. So we can decide where we want to put it. I'm going to choose the weapon. So you can either build modules that resolve against bones, or you could build manually add a socket, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to say add a new socket under the weapon bone. And now if we bring back the schematic, you can see that there's now a socket popping up here. So if I zoom in, I can see it's the orange one. And I can use that now to drag a module onto it. So I'm going to add a single control here. So it's built it out there, but it hasn't parented it yet under the arm. So because I want it to follow, I'm actually going to drag and drop it under the right arm, or the right hand in this case. And so there's a couple things that happen. First of all, it's reparented this, but it's also put the control into red, because there's logic in our modules where basically controls follow naming schema, and we'll have red on the right and blue on the left. Yeah, but it's also connected up the right way. What it hasn't done yet, it hasn't actually parented the module, the control correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and actually change that to be under the hand. So I'm just going to say put this under the hand control, and now it's going to follow with animation. But I can use this control now to move this around. Let me just hide this real quick. So you can see now I have the weapon in my hand, no pun intended, and I can start moving it around. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to add another module here. The add control is basically the single control, all rotation, translation, scale. But what if I wanted to have something that is a bit more custom, is something that we don't ship with? Well, with the system we built, you can quite easily build your own modules. So you can build a control rig that is sort of a mini rig that does something simple like a single axis rotation, and then you can turn that into a module that becomes available in the system. So let me show you how that's done. I'll open up the hinge that I've prepared. So this module here is, let me go here. This is the hinge module. So you can see it's basically a mini module that, let me see where the control is. Apologies, I don't seem to be seeing the control, but let's ignore that for a second. So basically, that you can see what this module is doing is really simple. It's basically taking the control and driving the bone with it using a single axis rotation. And on the backward solve, which is if you go back in sequencer and you want to resolve from an existing animation to controls, it does exactly the opposite. So it's rather simple. And in the construction, it has to build out one control based on what it's connected to. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. We have a document that sort of describes how to set up modules and what's needed there. The main differences between building a normal rig and a module is that you have to specify what is called a connector, which is sort of your way of indirecting on saying, like, I'm going to have a connector that's called, in this case, called a hinge that will be resolved onto a bone. And then depending what I resolve it to, that's where it's going to build the control. So let me show you how you use it in the end. So now I'm actually going to use the hinge module that I've just been showing you. I'm going to parent it under that control. I'm going to do it this way now. And then I'm going to pick a bone I want it on. The bone of the weapon I want to use is called hinge A. You can see it's putting it down there. And then I can parent it under my hinge control that already exists. I think weapon is called. There we go. So now we have a single axis rotation. So if I click on this guy, let me clean up the view a bit again and remove the bones we have. If I rotate it, you can see that's already working. I can only rotate in that axis, but you can see it's clearly not the right axis for this particular mechanical setup. So I'm just going to click on the hinge, go to the details, and switch the primary axis of the module over to X. And now we're going to get the right axes. So now if I turn it, you can see now we can move this in and we can start putting limits in. You can define min and maxes for it. So you can see, I don't know if I have this here already. Yeah, you have min and max as configured in the module. So I can make it not only go this far, or depending on my choice. Clearly these limits currently are not correct. But you could set this up, and then basically the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another hinge under that. I'm going to use hinge B and parent it to my previous hinge control. And again, I'm going to have to change the axis to probably X, which is, by the way, it's interesting. The way that these bones are set up is like Kieran was saying, the orientation is really important, but in this particular case, the x-axis is actually rotation axis and is not pointing along the chain. So I found that it really depends on where the assets are coming from. And clearly for those mechanical assets at the time, they've chosen to do it that way. Anyway, so you can see, I'm going to stop here. There's many more in here. As you can see, you can add more hinges and things, but I wanted to show that, how you can rig up something for animation that's not the classical biped, or in this case, sort of a weapon or auxiliary item that the character is carrying. And now that that's done, you're going to look at the prepared one that I made, which is this guy that has everything set up, has more details on the weapon and everything. And once you have that, you can start animating with it. So I'm going to go over to this, I believe. Hold on. Yeah, and here you have the character animated. There's a couple of emotes that we use to invert from, and there's some hand animation blended in as well. If you click on the rig, you can see it in action. Yeah, and you can see how the whole character is animated now with this rig. I'll leave here standing like this. I'll stop for questions. Anything came up while I was talking, Tina?
So far, most of it is they're just following along very rapidly. It's what you're talking about. The main question that I have seen so far is in regards to orientation again, where they were wondering if you recommend orienting bones to fit the rig requirements or making a ghost skeleton that has the proper orientation for the rig.
I would always go skeleton first, mainly because by my experience, even though you have rigs, many animations get converted back to FK animation and then mixed with other sources. And so I'd consider the rig a tool on top of the skeleton. So if you know what I mean, if you build a specific rig and you build a skeleton just for that rig, it may not be as easy to use other tools like the retargeter and, I don't know, mocap source animation that may come from other sources with it.
Awesome.
Cool, exciting. So yeah, I want to give a shout out to a bunch of people on LinkedIn and other socials that certainly influenced our will for innovation and my spirit. It's always really fun to see those things. So thank you, Pavel Oliva and Josh Tunen, Jonathan Abenheim, Thomas Bittner, and many others that I can't remember right now. It's always good fun to see how people toy with these tools and build rather impressive things. And new feature requests that came out of that. So especially with Control Rig in the last two or 3 years, this has been super productive, and many of the things that people complained about or wished for have been implemented by now. So it's good fun to please keep doing it. All right, so let's go back to the deck. So why do we build modular rigging this way, right? Let's only go through that for a moment. Clearly there's, room for improvement for what you've just been showing you, sort of the granular UI. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is 5.5 and what we're doing for that. Real briefly, it's actually really easy to say. We are not going to add anything major, but we're focusing on improving UX. So many of the things that you've been seeing me do and sort of go through rather noisy UI in the modular tree and things like that. We focus on 5.5 to clean that up. That's our whole goal, is to make the experience more enjoyable. With 5.4 being released and experimental, we're going to beta in 5.5, so we really want to make sure that the workflow is fun, there's not too many clicks involved, the UI is clean, etc. So that's what you'll see in 5.5 is, of course, addressing bugs, but also making the UI and the whole overall user experience better. But why did we go about building modular rigging this particular way, right? Seems like normal entity approach with an outliner is very similar, yet it's a bit different. Like, why did we build it this way? Let's take a look. So bear with me while I go through these slides. I find them quite enjoyable. So rigging is really hard, right? That's basically what this slide is trying to convey, is that if you just use control rig or just Python, math is hard, and it takes a really long time to become a technical rigger in technical packages, right? And so while I really enjoy it, I'm usually in the minority, and also technical riggers are a rare breed, sort of in the market and who's available, right? And yeah, you have to learn a lot. Control rig is powerful, but it has a rather steep learning curve. So low-level concepts as math, such as quaternions, are not everyone's cup of tea, and iteration is slow. Well, it's not that slow, given we have real-time sort of what you see is what you get, but it's still slower than what we were aiming for. And you have to do the same thing over and over again. Even if you use functions in control rig, there's still a lot of setup that you have to do over and over again, and we just felt like there's room for improvement there. So what a modular rig is trying to take a stab at is to solve this by adding playfulness to rigging. Control rig is about modular control rig is about assembling a character from parts and focusing more on the final animation, less on complex granular graphs. Inside of modular control rig, we can also author modules in this framework. I mean, we can author modules and use the full power of the lower level granular system, right? Which is fun. So we basically have the best of both worlds. Yeah, and as I've hinted at before, plugins for DCCs offer some of this functionality. The good news is the concepts are somewhat known by now. The overall idea of a module or component for rigging is nothing new, but it tends to be difficult to add new modules to frameworks. Like, most of the time, it's only possible in scripting or programming languages such as Python or C++. And getting to the character rig tends to take a while. Like, if you have a script that, like a Python script and something like Maya, and you run that to generate your character, you tend to wait a while. With a while, I mean from, I don't know, a couple of seconds to minutes, depending on the system you're working with. And that, of course, makes iterations slow, and finding problems with your character take a while. So what we really wanted to do is make everything real time, right? Make everything playful, and what you see is what you get. When you edit a module, you add an arm, you see the arm, you can play with it immediately. If you're retargeting onto it, you see the animation immediately, etc. So it's a rapid iteration visual way. So with this system, we focus on two different sets of users. Like I said, we sort of think that there's, this may be the same person, but sort of in terms of user persona, we focus on module authors and module users. So in other words, like people that like to build super technical graphs and people that want to put together characters quickly. We want to provide immediate feedback as you build in the character. We want to make it easy to build modules, pose and test, and continue to build modules, etc. We want to keep everything referenced, so that means rigs are always recreated on the fly. So when you change a module, that will automatically be propagated to the character that's using it. You don't have to rerun any script. And the connector framework offers rules, so you can build modules in a way where they can connect anywhere and they can be free, or you can say, for my production, I have very clear metadata tags that need to exist somewhere, and only then I allow the module to be connected, to make it easy for your users to know where things can go. And hopefully that makes it more fun. So aside from the 95% case, I want to take a look at a couple more examples that are not the classical examples. Let's go back here. I'm going to go to the first one real quick. So let's start with the shark. So the shark is a rig which is built out of a really small amount of modules. So you can see that we basically have the root, as you've seen before. We have the body here. Let me hide the schematic. So that's the body. And then you can see these things that have secondary animation on them. They're what I call a mechanical simulated hinge. So it's basically a hinge like the one you've seen before, but it has a relay integration inside of it. So it doesn't rotate only based on the input animation. It will also animate based on the parent's movement. So it can take any of these and pose them up, and anything that's nested below it will follow the simulation a bit. It's not too much, and you have controls over animation channels that get generated for strength and the typical like trying to keep it simple sort of settings for these fake physics. But they help you to quickly build up a character, right? So you can add these and configure them across your character. So you have things that you want to wiggle a bit on the character. You can build a module that does that in the way that you want to control it for your animators. And then you could just stick those things where they should go. I also wanted to point out that for this mesh, so let me see if I can get to it quickly. I use the tools that Kieran was showing before. So if you go into any of the bones I added here, yeah, I use the rigid bind skinning, basically the vertex, select the vertex, flood, and then assign it to the bones I built. So all the bones, the skeletons, and all the skinning was done in Engine for this. And I got to be honest, even though I'm part of the same group, I didn't really use these tools before much. But when we were preparing for the different events this year, I went through and used the tools for all the characters, and it was really quite enjoyable to set them up quickly. So I can only recommend you guys to try all of these tools together and try to get to sort of not necessarily the external DCC free pipeline. I wouldn't say that immediately, but certainly you can invest in trying to figure out how much you can move to Engine, mainly because your feedback is going to be faster. Yeah, so if we look at that simulated hinge real quick, then we can carry on to the next one. It will look very similar, but the main difference is going to be that rather than just setting the rotation, there will be a spring interpolate, which basically takes the target that it's trying to reach and then interpolate towards it, right? So I'm not going to explain this graph to you, but this is for the technical users, but it's basically using a relay integrator that, yeah, will, rather than orienting something directly using a rotation input, will use the rotation input as a guidance for a spring to sort of get, yeah, align it to that target. So once you've set this up, yeah, go ahead.
How did you expose those few parameters for this module to the module user?
Oh, that's a good point. So yeah, as with any other control rig, you can just add under my blueprint, you can add these variables. So if you go under my blueprint in the module, you can see the variables that are public that have the eye opened. And those are going to be the settings that are available to you. And then within the graph, they're going to be, those are the things that get used. So if we look for simulated spring, for example, that's going to have, probably not this one. Yeah, so actually what I'm doing with those, there's certain settings that will spawn animation channels. So you don't only have static configuration of the spring strength in this particular case, but what it's actually doing during construction event, it will spawn animation channels. I believe they're spawned somewhere here, right? So it will spawn the strength, the critical damping, and so on. It will use the variables that are provided as the default settings, but it will make it possible to animate these later in Sequencer.
Very cool.
So some of the settings are static, like do you have a limit min, yes or no? What are your rotation limits? But then other things like the critical damping or the strength, they're actually spawned animation channels, and we can look at them in Sequencer in a second. Yeah, so if we go over to the Sequencer animation that got prepared by Frederick Nielsen, thank you, Frederick. There's a video actually I don't have here where you can see Frederick doing the whole animation and creating the animation. And one of the things he uses mouse capture a lot. So you can sort of tell a bit as well. So as the shark is sort of going through the animation, what he started out with roughing out was capturing his mouse pointer, moving the body around, and having the springs all react to it. So you sort of can get a quite playful setup for this animation. And then by adding some camera cuts and sort of depth of field to it, it can get quite interesting really fast. Yeah, but if you look at the rig itself, you can see that these hinges, they're going to have these parameters that I was talking about, and you can animate them here now, which is right important, right? So as an animator, you may want some simulation at certain times, but you need control over turning it off completely. So you can select any of these, open it up, and say like, I'm going to actually change the scale down to 0, and then it will stop simulating that for that moment in time. Yeah, let's move on. Any questions here, Tina, for this? The next one is very similar, so we can distribute the questions over these two examples.
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of them are specifically around animation in the control rig. So,
all right, I'll carry on then.
Yeah.
So the second one I want to show you is sort of a build up from the one I've just been showing you. So, the scooter is another asset that's a mechanical asset, again, all rigged up in engine and skinned up, etc. Is using a couple more modules. So the first one it uses, let me actually pull that up. We should have a way of looking at the wheel. Yeah, and here you can see this is a better example of how I build a module in terms of visuals. So I basically brought in the whole skeletal mesh I was going to build the module against, and I picked one of the bones. And here you can see how these connectors, these are the blue ones, how they resolve. So they resolve to the wheel front, but I might as well move it to the wheel rear, and then the control is going to build in the back here. So I can try out my module and how it's going to work. I managed to pull in the right thing. So you can see basically as I reconfigure the connectors where they sit, the construction will run again, the rig will get rebuilt, and then I can try it in different pieces of parts of the character. So if you're building a sort of a secondary spring, right, on a character, you may go through a bunch of different characters and try it on a couple different ones before you know your module is right and has the right settings. So the wheel is basically a hinge, right? Same thing. It has a single axis rotation, and I can manually animate it and everything. However, it also records its animation right now along sort of the raycasted projected path, and it will rotate the wheel accordingly. So for that, I believe I usually add something in the rig which creates procedural animation so I can test it. So you can see there's a branch here which is basically moving the character back and forth using a sine wave. And so if I enable this, you can see how the character is going to go back and forth. So I can see what would happen if the guy was rolling, and here you can see now basically I have these settings. I can animate gas and brakes to do sort of a spin out or a spin through and a brake, so it rotates less than it would with full contact. It's going to animate all these things. So I've built a simple wheel module that I can then put in my modular rig on the two wheels. So of course, now you see that is really referenced at all times. I've kept the sine wave, so I need to put that out again. Hold on. Yeah, so I need to disable this again. And not close the asset. Hold on, I'm getting there. All right, back to normal. So, we have the wheel simulation here, and then I've used the hinge that we've been seeing before for everything else. So I have the hinge for the steering that has its limits turned on correctly. I have the hinge for this rear suspension here that has limits turned on as the same. And then I've built another one which is basically the same as the hinge, but this time for a single axis translation with limits, so called a slider. So this guy is responsible for the suspension in the front. You can see that, so not a big deal there. Yeah, the pedals and all these things, they're all using these green circles, so they're all hinges. But then what I've also built is proxies, right? So I'm not going to get into what proxies are and how you use them all that much because it's going to bloat the time. But proxies are basically, in short, they're controls that can drive other controls. So they're sort of posing tools. They're not animated. They don't get any keyframes, but they're there for you to pose out the character. And so for this guy, if you wanted to pose the scooter up so it would stand on the rear wheel, you could just use this proxy here and turn the character up. And what that really does, it moves and rotates the yellow box here. And you can do this with both of these. So you basically have ways of posing up the character and rotating it around the wheel, spinning it on the wheel on the ground as needed. So I can do I can do this, and I can also do it in the back. What's interesting is there's actually no cycle here whatsoever. It's just depending on which one you're turning on, that's the one that will affect in the other pose, the rest of the pose. But yeah, you can build these up as modules, and you can put them as pivot points on your character where needed. So animators have additional pivot points they can use to pose. And finally, the big showdown is there's another one here, which is this big proxy, and the proxy is actually driving the position of the body and the suspensions all in one. So as I turn it, if it was working, let me see. Did I manage to break the rig now? Probably. Hold on. Yeah, I don't know what I did, but it sort of broke it for a second. So basically, as I turn it, you can see that the front suspension is going in, the rear suspension is going in. I can also tilt the character this way, and then the steering wheel kick in. So this is not necessarily the best proxy ever built, but I wanted to highlight that with a single proxy, you can actually affect a lot of things in the character and make it easier for the character animators. So again, thanks to Fred Nielsen, I'm going to show small animation utilizing all this. It's called Curve Around Anim, rightfully so. There you go. So you can see the little scooter on a curve, driving around, leaning, and he was using mainly the proxy I was talking about. So he has a curve, and then he's just sort of tilting the character a bit, using that one control that drives all the other ones keying correctly. Yeah, there we go.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I just want to point out that for anyone who's done rigging in Maya, this would involve a tremendous amount of custom in-scene rigging to do what the proxy control is doing.
Yeah.
So this is a case of, in my opinion, Unreal Engine not just meeting expectations but exceeding what's capable in a typical DCC, and that's purely due to the evaluation framework and allowing proxies to actually affect the rig. Very cool stuff.
Yeah, it's due to the way that the rig is actually running, right? Because it's not a DG, so we don't have to wire things up using, well, wires. But you can choose how things should be running, and you can go one frame, you can go one way, and the other frame you can go a different way. It's completely up to you. And you can even do things that happen in the rig only when the user's interacting with the control, which is sort of free for all. You can do whatever you want, which is what the proxies are using, right?
Right.
Anything else,
Okay.
Tina? Maybe something to add? Questions concerning animation here?
Insane. I do have a couple questions that I could toss your way now. The first one here is in regards to what you were just showing. They're actually wondering if these animations can, in theory, be just chucked right on a KS vehicle once authored, for example, or would they need to treat those more like characters?
That really depends. I mean, it's a fully simulated vehicle, then that will be a bit different, right? So if it's a game asset that is fully driven by physics, that's a bit different. But maybe this is a good sort of segue towards the future facing roadmap. We are working on integrating physics with control rig. So there's going to be a time where you can have a simulation that's driven by an animation rig like this, and you can mix these things better. So right now the springs I'm showing, they're sort of fake verlet springs. They're not really interacting with the world, and there's no real collision with the wheels to the ground. And the suspension doesn't really react to the ground. It's all like, hand animated on top. But once we start integrating physics, you'll be able to use the full scene and be able to interact with the character with other characters or with the world as you wish, and then you can build animation systems against that depending on the need. So for vehicles, this will be a typical case where you make certain things art directable and other things fully physics. It's really up to you.
Yeah, awesome. Do you recommend skinning mechanical, non-deforming vertices to bones, or does it make more sense to parent static meshes to the bones?
I guess I can take that one.
Yeah.
If the animation system is entirely built around skeletons, so while it's technically possible to animate, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, you can animate like a hierarchy of actors or parts, but yeah. No, I would just go with merging everything into a skeletal mesh and using bones.
There are ways of using, and people are using this actually quite a bit in UEFN, where basically you create an actor that has a bunch of static meshes inside of a hierarchy, and then you can bind a control rig to that structure rather than a skeleton. You can do that. The issue is, though, that the rest of the animation pipelines doesn't work with that, so you can't mix and match easier as easily. So like Kieran was saying, if everything's skeletal mesh, it's much easier.
Yeah, it depends on the workflow too. I mean, a lot of folks want to do that to, get access to nanite with static meshes and be able to rig that. But that will be the future will be looking at including nanite into skeletal meshes anyway. So.
Right, all right. Two more super quick questions for you. One of them is, can the modules read from the get user data node?
Yeah. They're just, so user data is passed from the top down, so it's accessible in all the modules. Also the hierarchy, so the bones and controls and things like that, they're accessible from all modules. So what that means is that we use this a lot in our modules, that the root module will leave breadcrumbs, sort of metadata on things, and then other modules can pick it up and read from that or write back to it. So that way you can have communication between modules if you need that.
Very nice. All right. And then the last one I've got for you here, just super quick, is are the shark and the moped available anywhere for us to experiment with? And if not, can they be?
That is a really good question, and I'm afraid I can't answer it. Maybe Greg can, but I'm certainly not aware of how that works here.
They're not on the control rig examples, but we can look into adding those into the pack and getting an update for folks.
Nice. All right. I think that's good for now then.
Awesome. I just have a last little demo here, which is probably the most technical rig we've seen so far. It's very technical, but I still want to show it's not using modular rigs. It's just showing the power of control rig and proxies. This is actually something that Pavel Oliva was doing on LinkedIn, and then he got some recognition for it, and I saw it, and I was like, I think he did it in Blender, and it was really impressive. And not to start at a competition, but I felt like, well, this is really complicated in the way to do it. So I'm curious if you can do it a bit easier with the framework we have. It's about rolling coin rig. So basically, this one coin here is animated. Let me see if I can play through this. So it's sort of doing its animation and falling down. And the way this is animated is actually using a single proxy. So let's go to the rig, and I can show you real quick. So the rig is built using a proxy, which is used to roll the rig around, and it's basically doing a simulation. So what you have here is this green circle that's sort of highlighting sort of a joystick boundary, and then the one in the middle is the actual sort of joystick. So as I move it, it will tilt the coin up. We'll do a bunch of things, actually. It will tilt it up, and it will create another proxy. So as part of this, it's spawning a proxy that's on the ground where the coin is touching. And so that way I can sort of roll it around like this. And you can see it can sort of do that, and it will move it around, and I'll have some feedback on how many steps I've done. And at any point, I can sort of put it like this and use this proxy to tilt it again. And what's cool is that the only thing that's really animated is this FK control, right? So as an animator, you'll know that there's some issues with this, with interpolation and so on. But what's important to know is that for these kind of things, since they're half simulations, you can bake them. You can sort of bake them back to an FK animation and sequencer, and there's many other tools that we have to do this. But you can use the rig as sort of a posing tool for creating complex animations as needed. And I found this one was a really interesting, hard problem. And again, the rig is here. We may be able to share it. We may be able to share it without this particular mesh, I guess. But it's somewhat commented through, and I tried to explain, the different things that are going on. But this is a very technical rig, right, as you can imagine. But it's not insane. Like if you look at the graph, I know it's a lot of nodes, but it's not completely nuts in terms of what it has to do. It's still manageable for somebody who's technical.
It's far less nuts than the web of constraints that would be required to get this behavior otherwise.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, that's all I have.
Oh my God, amazing. I love that was like the perfect little, oh, and by the way, here is this insanely cool thing. Don't worry about it. Oh, so much fun. All right. Well,
Cool.
we're still going to be taking in questions, of course, about modular rig and all those good things. So make sure you keep asking them. But in the meantime, Greg, I think we're on you now, right? Handing it off to you.
Yeah, let's do it. So now that we've kind of taken over we've taken a look at a lot of like the new rigging features. I want to take a look at how we apply them in, cinematic animations or just animation authoring. So Sequencer is our cinematic authoring tool. It's been around since 4.12, and there's been a lot of things that we've been doing to make the quality of life better for not only cinematic shot creators but also animators. You'll see, we've put in a lot of work to, make this a little cleaner. You have more columns and such, so that way you can easily access actions instead of constantly going to right-click menus. And we've also done a lot of different things to just improve different workflows for real-time animation. And in particular, I'm passionate about not necessarily just making it easier for people to animate, but actually to incorporate more of the real-time technology that you see within Unreal and put it into the hands of the animators. So I saw a lot of questions around like, hey, how can I animate on top of existing animations and such? So let's imagine that we have a character. Now I know I have the mannequin here, but let's imagine that it was, using Kieran's like a little lizard man, and we're using, rigs that Helga has made from modular rigging and such. Like these are all very plug and play systems, and that's the way that we've kind of designed them. So in previous versions of Unreal, you might be familiar with, I have this animation and maybe I want to use a control rig to edit it, and just do some tweaks here and there. And previously, what we would have to do is, right click, bake to a control rig, and let it bake every frame that is in sequencer, and I can just start animating, right? The problem with this is that there's a lot of bake keys. This is a lot of things to work with, and if you're an animator, you don't really want to work with bake keys all the time. You might be familiar with it with like motion capture, but it's not the best workflow that we want to fully encourage. So let me just undo back so that way we just have the animation clip here. So in 5.4, we introduced a feature called layered control rigs. And layered control rigs are something that's really powerful. And one of the first showcases that we can do here is if I just hit this plus sign and go under control rig, you'll see that there's a new checkbox called layered. And I can turn that on and go and add this CR mannequin body. And I'll go over the technical details on how to set this up and how you set up your control rig to allow this feature. But now, as I'm moving this around, you'll see that the rig is actually behaving without me having to bake any keys. I can move this clip around. I can add even more clips. Let me do like a run. That behaves, the rig behaves entirely. I can even blend this on top of one another. And we can get, obviously right now it's not going to be great blending matching, but you can see how the rig is behaving on top of the existing animation. If I want to, I can just do a simple, hey, I'm just going to move this body down and I'm just going to continue scrubbing. And you'll see that the clip and the control rig all behave together very well. And the whole reason why this works is because there's a backward solve on it. So what's actually happening is that it's running the backwards and forward solve live together and taking in any of the incoming animations from this track all the way down to the control rig, so that way we can, author on top of it. And yeah, it's introduced all sorts of really interesting workflows. So let me delete this run and move this walk back. And for the moment, I'm just going to remove this layer control rig. So I'm going to load up some cubes that I've added to the world. And if you're in character animation or even in layout or like pre-visualization, you know that environments change all the time. And in order to, compensate your animation for your character to the terrain or, any sort of environment changes, it requires a lot of work. You would have to basically re-author this animation in order to get this, get the mannequin actually moving across this terrain. Well, that's actually not a problem with layer control rigs because control rig has all sorts of different methods to do runtime operations and traces. We can actually just add a ground alignment control rig. So now, as I'm scrubbing, you'll see that the mannequin is actually following the terrain of the cubes that I have here. I can even tweak this cube, and you can see that it adjusts automatically on the fly. I can even add more animations if I want to. I can add more cubes. I can do all sorts of different things in order to get this behavior that I want. And let's just take a look at this rig briefly. I have the content examples project, and by the way, this ground alignment rig is a part of the content examples, so you can take a look at it right now if you want to. And if I go under control rig, rigs, we can open up this, where is it? Ground alignment. And there's not a lot going on in the forward solve. There's a couple of functions that are added. This was made by one of our technical animators, Jeremy Passerin, and he put together this really simple rig that not only can you reuse these functions in other rigs if you want to, but you can take a look at some logic that a professional rigger has used, where we're basically just taking in a bone, we're looking at the spear trace on the ground, and we're also drawing some sort of debug line, and then just returning to hit normal. And then we're just applying that onto our legs and compensating on that on our hips as well. So pretty simple, and you can access that in the content examples. And not only can you do that, but we can also layer more rigs on top of this. So let's say, for example, I like this, but I don't know. Maybe I want the hips to go lower. Maybe I want to change the head, or change the aim of the head, right? So I can just add another layered control rig and add the CR mannequin body. Now, what that's going to do is that will add my control rig here, but we have to change the order of the evaluation. And you can just do that by right-clicking, and you'll see this order number. And this order number operates the same as a hierarchical bias with a sequencer, if you're familiar with that, where the highest number is evaluated first. So what we want to do is actually want the ground alignment to get activated first. Then we want our body to happen after. So I'm just going to change that from 101 to 100. So that way you'll see that, hey, ground alignment is active. I now have my animation authoring rig, and I can still edit this, do whatever that I want to it, right? And also animate on top of this. So I no longer have to deal with big keys. I can add as many kind of rigs as I want to on the fly. And also at the same time, like I think I saw a question in the chat about like, hey, I want to just override my hand animation, right? Now I just have this body, like the full body rig, but if you just had like a, I don't know, like a hand module, right? You create a modular rig for your hand, you could just layer that hand module on, your left hand or your right hand, and just be able to animate and just adjust the hand and not necessarily any part of the body, which is pretty neat. And just to show one other thing, just because I had done this earlier, I did create a modular rig, and just to show that it does work for video proof, that modular rigs do work with layered control rigs. You'll see that this is the modular rig. I know some people were asking about the pull vectors. I am in 5.4.4, which has that fixed on the pull vectors. If you have seen that with the modular legs or the leg modules. But if we were to remove this mannequin body and add the modular control rig, you'll see that, oh, I think I need to change the order to 100. You'll see that the modular rig works, and I can do adjustments like I was doing previously. Some hotkeys that are on hand, you might be familiar with Control G to reset your control within control rig. In layered control rig mode, that's a little bit different because that actually will reset the controls back to its initial values. But if you want to take in the incoming one, you would just hit Control I, and that will reset that back to whatever incoming motion is coming through. And the same thing with Control Shift I as well. Let's say, just for example, I don't know, like I have this walk and I want to not have ground alignment completely activate immediately. I only want ground alignment to activate maybe at this portion of the animation. We can actually weight the layer control rigs too, and you can turn that off and turn it on, anytime within and key it. So within the layer control rig, I can right click and activate this weight, and I can pop this down, and I was like, all right, cool. So at this point, I want to key this at 1, and maybe at the frame before, or sometime before, I can hit 0 and just key that, so that ground alignment doesn't get activated. And this is I didn't do a great example, but you could see that it's not active when that foot is over here, but then it's active when it's over here. But we can move the keys and do all sorts of stuff, so that way we can see when the ground alignment is active. Are there any questions or comments as I'm, playing around with this? I don't know. I just find this
Just
super
one
fun.
comment. Just one comment from me,
Yeah.
Greg. I think this is the best demo I've seen so far of layer control. It really explains what they're for and what they're useful for. It's a great job. Thank you.
Yeah. I know at times in the past I've had to do all sorts of crazy things with like duplication of NMVPs and converting them into like slots and such, right? And the whole idea is to try to not have to create so many NMVPs or have like a monstrous cinematic NMVP for your gameplay, and you could just have control rig logic that you can just run and just slap on at any time. You don't necessarily have to have it active all the time. You just slap it on whenever you want to, right? And I think that's the super powerful part about layer control rigs.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Greg,
Mhm.
I have a question about, so if we wanted to say throw a layer on that just added dynamic motion to a part of the character, how does that work with scrubbing? And would you recommend a workflow where we like bake that down to FK and just kind of leave it alone, or keep it live all the way through, or how did
Yeah.
dynamics and this work together?
Yeah, so I think that's actually an excellent segue to my second example. So let me close this sequence, and I'll just hide these cubes, and I will bring in this dinosaur. So y'all might be familiar with this little dino done by Andreas Suika, and that's in our content examples and in I think some of our example projects. So he had recorded this animation, and you'll see some loop breakage because he had just recorded the gameplay, and this was all dynamic motion that was done in Control Rig and NMVP. But he had recorded the gameplay with Take Recorder. And you might be thinking, okay, this is really neat, but I want to have a perfect loop. I don't want to have that tail be completely, snap back. Neither do I want the wings, and maybe I want to fix up the feet a little bit here and there, right? So I authored a control rig, which I just called procedural motion, and I had slapped on what is a function called local chain dynamics, which I think Jeremy also had authored that, or maybe chased it. But and what I've done is basically said, hey, I just want to override the tail, so I just got all the tail bones, the tongue bone, because this guy has a little tongue here, and the wings. So I'm only overriding, or I'm gonna only be rigging up these parts, right? Basically the dynamic parts of the character. So what I'll do is I can actually just add that as a regular control rig. And the reason why I'm going to do it this way is because I don't need the additional backward solve coming through. I'm just saying, hey, use this control rig to override the animations that are coming through from the bones, or the specific bones. So now as I play it, you'll see that as I'm scrubbing, like you were saying, Kieran, right? Like you get kind of these like pseudo physics with a control rig. And this also can work with NMVP. We have a lot of this within Fortnite where there's a lot of dangly bits for characters like back blings or ponytails or chains, and you can do the same thing if you want to author motion against it, right? And basically now I've completely overridden just the tail, the wings, and a little bit of the tongue. And I have some parameters that I can edit here to, change the tail blend or change any of the parts of the wings or the tongue as well. Now, what's the cool part about this is now I can actually, let me pause my sequence here. I can actually add a layer control rig and add my animation authoring rig on top of this. Oh, I wonder what's going on here. I had my controls. Maybe I need let me go to my animation rig. I think I just need to recompile. Something happened there. Let me try that again. Okay. Maybe I need to close the sequence or refresh. Okay. I just needed a refresh. Okay, cool. So now you'll see that my animation authoring rig. And just to show that order, we would probably want that to be underneath whatever order that we would have for the procedural motion. So I'm going to make sure that's just a higher evaluation. You'll see that I have my physics here, and I can now, you know, just add an additional offset here, which is going to look a little funky, but you could, you get the idea, right? You can, get all of this motion and complete author against it with layer control rigs, and there's all sorts of, fun that you can do without having to bake this. And I would recommend when you do, like, say, ship a game or, cook it, that you do bake it. But as you're authoring, right, you shouldn't have to focus on, having to deal with so much data as you're just like tweaking things or just adding additional offsets or adjustments on the fly. You don't want to think about like all these offsets across the entire time of your sequence. You just want to do one little tweak or one little thing. And I really recommend this workflow for not only animation authoring, but motion editing, just slapping on physics, and just this workflow is super powerful.
That relates really well back to the question earlier from Tina around vehicles and combining chaos physics vehicles. And so, yeah, absolutely, you can combine in this way. I didn't even think of that. So that, yeah, you don't have to prescribe all these things into your rig. You can just sort of build on top of each other and using the different systems, which is, again, is like, this is a big selling point, and not only sort of an on par feature compared to external DCCs, but here you're utilizing all the different features of the engine together, right? Which is huge.
Yeah. And I think for folks that are interested in our future, you'll see a lot of this moving ahead. You'll see, like right now, for example, right, like I had to make a rig for the tail and such, but who knows, maybe with modules, right, that can be as easily like added just for the tail, right, or just for the wings. We're kind of building all of these foundational pieces, right, so that way users can quickly access a lot of the real-time tech and just slap it on to whatever characters they want, whether that is retargeting, module control rig, animation authoring, etc., etc. But yeah, that's what I had mainly to show. But
Amazing.
yeah, happy to take any questions.
Yeah, there's a couple for you here. So the first one that I think is a good place to start with is someone was asking about how optimized layered control rigs are, and if they, because obviously you showed how easy it is to be able to add a whole bunch and gave some great examples of good times to use them. And it seems like they're curious on if it's good to get into the habit of using layered control rigs like that, or if they should still be relying on keyframing and all of that when they can.
Yeah, performance. I would just say it depends on your how heavy your use case is, right? Like this right now, I would say is is very performant, right? But it's not like a incredibly heavy use case, is what I would say. For editor authoring, I think you can slap on as many as you like, as long as you're not doing like all of the things that you want to do at the same time, right? The whole point is to try to add things, and then it's like, okay, cool, this is fun. All right, now I'm happy with this. You can bake it and put it in your game or whatnot, right? I definitely wouldn't recommend having these immediately and then shipping out of your game. You would want to bake it to some extent, but there are future plans to make it even further performant, as I would like to not have to constantly go into animation blueprints to add additional logic and just turn on and off stuff for gameplay cinematics.
For sure. Let's see. Is there a way to layer a motion path somehow, or motion wrapping to change that walking path with a layered control rig?
Yes. One something that I was thinking about doing was before I came to Epic, I was in pre-visualization for film a lot, and oftentimes you would have characters riding in cars, right? And it was always a hard problem to deal with. Okay, cool. I have a character in a car, but then I'm constantly switching between like global space and local space with your IKs, especially if you want like wheels turning and such, right? So you can actually do a lot of really interesting things where you could say, hey, I want my car to follow this path with one layer control rig, right? But then the characters, I'm going to constrain with another layer control rig into that car. And then now I'm going to locally author my animations with my bodies just on that, because how the layer stacking is happening, right? It's like, okay, we're just going to follow the car. And then now you're just editing your local animations. And something I didn't show, which I could show here, is that layer control rigs actually works pretty well with constraints. I think maybe Benoit has a demonstration of that when he goes over that. But you can do all sorts of things with like paths and such if you wanted to.
Actually, I don't have any demos about that, but yeah, I think there's one in the content example.
I
think the look at is like based on that.
Yeah, that's a good segue to this part. If you're curious about layer control rigs, I put together in the last part of the animation control rig map an entire section on layer control rigs. So you'll see some museum pieces about how you can layer rigs for animation authoring, the ground alignment example that I was showing earlier, layer control rig with constraints. Here's the example where you can do a look at with this kind of sphere, layering multiple control rigs, controlling the weight layering, and also if you have like simulated animation, right? Kind of like what I was showing earlier, or I had done like a I just dragged Manny around in fat and recorded it and just slapped the layer control rig on top. So that was pretty fun.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Let's see. One other question, a couple other questions that came in. Want to make sure I can get these for you. So someone said, might have missed this if it was explained already, but can we override keys with a layer so that the layer is overriding those keys entirely and not just offsetting?
Right. So something to be very clear, layer control rigs is not like what you would expect out of what you would expect in like animation layers and other packages. Layer control rigs is more the idea of layering rig logic on top of one another, because you don't want your whole monolithic rig. That being said, we are working on a feature for animation layers that will get released for 5.5. So just look forward to that, and I think you'll get the functionality that you would want there with that.
All right. This is awesome. Thank you so much for walking through all this, Greg.
Of course.
All right. Well, with that then, first I want to make sure, was there anything else that you wanted to cover? Don't want to get ahead of myself here.
No. I think we can pass it off to Benoit to cover the last bits of features for animators in Unreal.
All right, perfect. Then I will hand it off to you, Benoit. It is in your care. You have the reins. Oh, I think you are muted if you're saying things.
Just need to find the right window. Sorry about that.
No, you're all good.
So I'm not gonna do live demos as my workmates did, because like watching myself animated wouldn't be appealing. I'm not an animator, so bear with me. So I'm gonna use like pre-recorded animations to review all the engines. The engine animation features from a high-level point of view. Skimming through all of them would require a lot of time. So since the release of Vue 5, we've been improving all our animation tools so that they can first meet our internal needs, because like Epic Games is not that different from a standard customer, I would say, as well as any other companies and customers. So I won't be able to cover everything in details, but I'm gonna give you a brief overview of what's available in that 5.4 release. So then, can you play the rampage animation, please? So in 5.4, we added a new TRS gizmos, which is experimental for now. So you can enable it through the plugin. Then you have access to a new feature, a new boolean in your preferences. So they have a new look and style. They have proper and direct manipulation. You can use control, left middle mouse button, left mouse button, sorry, middle mouse button and right mouse button to move the different axes. We have parent space option during posing and a more stable angle rotation. You can also see on the right side that we have a new anim details panel, which is now centralized, showing transforms on any objects, not just control rigs. They are now also synchronized with the curve editor. So if you select something in anim details, it's going to select the curve in your curve editors. We also fix a bunch of issues with the sliders, improve them, and we keep on improving the quality of life around the curve editor, performances, zooming, panning, and so on. So we keep working on these tools to make your life better. We're going to switch to the next example then, the layered bipod. So this is basically similar to what Greg showed you. So this is probably my favorite feature in 5.4. So for any animators that did animation authoring, having a non-destructive pipeline is a huge plus. So in that example, we're just mixing 3 animations, adding a layered control rig on top of it, adding some sort of additional animation on top of it, and then you can create, like in a matter of few seconds or minutes, a new animation. You can export this one to a new animation sequence and so on. So the only thing you have to deal with is having a backward solve within your rig, and then all the rest is comes for free, basically. So all those layered control rig and modular rigs, as Greg mentioned, are working with space switching and constraints. And with 5.4, the constraint system has also like been updated. So we rewrote the data model. So now the constraints are saved with the level sequence. Now they are not saved within the map itself, but with the sequences. So if everything is spawnable, then your constraint will live within the sequence. We also worked on the evaluation engine, so you can handle more complex nested constraint setups. They are more powerful and flexible, and you can also now change the settings when creating your constraints. So you can filter axes. Let's say if you're creating a parent transform, you can disable some axes on the translation and rotation when you create the constraints. So you have more, you can trick your constraints when creating them. Next on, you can play the robot deformers. So we also worked on the deformer graph. So you can't really create appealing animation with static motions. You want a bit of like organic motion. So we added like the deformer graph is now beta in 5.4. You now have you have deformer nodes. You can collapse graph, create functions as you would do in control rig. You have access to deformer function library like linear, blend, skinning, dual, quaternion, bend, twist, squash, and stretch lattice, etc. Everything is ships with UE. So you can actually expose those deformers using control rig, and then add that control rig on top of your skeletal mesh, and then start animating them. So this is what you can see in that example. You have like a basic animation, and then another what we call scope deformer added on top of that, and you can see the result of activating it and deactivating it while you're playing, and you don't get the same motion at all. I mean, it's way more appealing with deformers on top of that. So by only exposing a few parameters to the deformers, you give the animators access to a lot of freedom while animating. So that animation has been done by Frederick Nielsen. All the animations from him are just amazing. You had the chance to see that with Elge's demos as well. So this is a new one. And then we're going to switch to the last demo, which is the shock deformer that is using the modular rig that LGA showcased a few minutes ago with the same rig and with a sculpt deformer on top of it, and also lights that are constrained to the rig. So all the animation authoring pieces are coming together in one single places. So this is the input animation. You can see the rig with the dynamics on top of that. You can also see the constraints right after. So you can see have the live dynamics while you are playing with the rig. Yeah, sorry, just trying to follow the video. So I think the next step is the lighting. So there are two lights that are constrained to directly to the skeletal mesh that are also animated. So they are parent. You can see on the left corner the two blue constraints. That are actually the constraints of the lights on the skeletal mesh, and then the deformer added on top of that to add a more organic motion when landing on the ground.
Good question, Benoit. In regards to the deformers, are they easier to author now? Are they?
Yeah, they are way easier. So in 5.4, you have to set a deformer on your skeletal mesh, and you can just use one type of deformer. But in the next release, you'll be able to directly add a control rig that is going to use a deformer. So you will be able to add several deformers just by adding new control rigs on your skeletal mesh. So yeah, you will be able to add like as many deformers as you want, as you would just by adding a new control rig on top of that.
Yeah, in fact, you can even, they're built using modules, so you can build modules which contain deformers. So you can put multiple deforming modules, if you will, on your character setups. And the way that is done now is it means that it's a nice package that contains both the animation controls and potentially 3D shape controls in the viewport that belong to the deformer in one module that you just drop on and configure. So it's a very different experience compared to previous releases.
Yeah, so that's it for the high-level view of animation authoring in UE. So we are still improving everything on that side. We are improving our filters and sequencer performances. The gizmos are getting new updates in 5.5 as well. The constraint system, like everything is, we keep improving all of this so that animating in UE is like better than within any other DCC, and keep the user within the engine as much as possible.
That's very cool. Yeah, I think the thing I want to stress again is it's sort of that mix of engine features like locomotion systems, simulation, and many of the other things that exist, and being able to utilize them together is where the big win is, right? Sequencer alone, I mean, for the fact that Sequencer is able to spawn things and change the world around. So in one scene, you can have many different ticks that actually have different configurations. That alone is a massive win over other environments. And if you combine that with being able to utilize sort of runtime systems, like drive a car around for a while, record the motion, then edit on top of that, that's a very different sort of approach to creating animation content.
Well, the lighting and atmosphere matters a lot too. Like in the shot with the shark, it's completely occluded, and you'd have no at the start of the shot, and you wouldn't know that if you were in a DCC animating in wireframe view or whatever.
Yep. Yeah, working in context, right?
Yeah. So everything can be adjusted together. It's so cool.
So we keep on working on improving all of this. And I also wanted to highlight that our internal projects are also animated in Engine. So all the Lego Fortnite animations are done in Engine. Some of the Fortnite cinematics as well, and so on. So yeah, we are also using our tools internally. So that's why we are keep work on that to improve all.
In the same vein, I'm currently working with Fortnite tech animators who are exclusively using the skinning tools to get a character into Fortnite. So I don't like the term, but we are dog fooding the heck out of these tools, using them ourselves and getting all the paper cuts so that you guys hopefully have a better experience.
And all the animation, I mean, the UE animation ecosystem is now working all together. So you can start from your skeletal mesh and rig it, animate it, either for animation authoring or runtime. So I mean, the animation authoring point of view is basically keyframing, but keep in mind that all the rigs you can see in here can run live as well, which is like awesome in a runtime environment. So.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out, and I don't know if this is the right time, but given this is sort of showcasing the different tools working together really well, is not necessarily a roadmap, because our public roadmap is available on the net now. But sort of the vision that we have for these systems to grow together, and on the rigging side is that, you know, we're aiming to have Sequencer for animation authoring be the main host for setting up characters as well. Right now, as you've seen throughout the last bit more than 2 hours now, it requires a bunch of different assets, and if you need a modular control, you have to build that, and if you want the spring on something, you need to build that, and then you can use that, etc. But when we started building the modular rig system, we built it so that it can be changed at runtime. So basically what that means is that we're going to be aiming for, I don't know what release, because this is a big job, but certainly on the division board, you'll see that, you know, we're aiming for being able to do this in Sequencer ad hoc. So as you're in the shot and you need a spring on something, you'll be able to create sort of a layered module or something. I don't know what it will be, but being able to do this edit directly as you're, you know, facing the animation challenge rather than having to prescribe it into the character beforehand, right? So this is it's a bit of a long shot because that will take a while, but just so you know that as we're adding in these kind of systems like physics, support for physics is a good example of, you know, being able to add a physics module that has certain capabilities and being able to drag it in and add it as a layered feature or add it as the base layer for animation right in Sequencer as you're animating the character rather than having to pre-build these setups for everything. So
that aligns perfectly with a lot of the future plans that we have for retargeting, where we want to bring retargeting as an operation that can happen live in your sequence.
That's great.
So yeah, just keeping everything as few mouse clicks away as possible from where the work's actually happening.
Yep, exactly. And you know, the same goes for deformers, right? Right now you'd have to put the deformer on a rig and then you move the rig in a sequencer. But if a squash and stretch deformer is a module that has everything it needs, why not being able to use that directly in sequencer? So those are the things that will be coming. Again, I'm not sort of operational on what release, but you certainly they're on a long-term roadmap and that will happen eventually.
And we can also, so yeah, I didn't showcase that, but we can also get the most of UE by, you can also have like a Pi running, do animation authoring and using a linked animation sequence, see the result live in Pi while you are animating, which is something you won't see in any other DCC. So we're trying to get the most of the engine, like with all those animation tools. And
yeah,
this is where it makes sense because all of them are now available. So.
And just to add, and maybe I don't know if there are people in the stream watching that haven't animated at all, that haven't touched things like this, you know, start with control rig examples, start with some of the examples contents that we have, but to sort of be assured that within sort of my net of people on LinkedIn, etc., I've gotten the feedback a lot of times that because of the immediacy and because of the real-time feedback, it's a lot less daunting than going into other packages. So yes, this is a lot of stuff to learn, and there's many, you know, becoming a good animator is a hard job. But because you get immediate feedback and you see everything, it's a lot less daunting to sort of go through and experiment and toy with these tools that are being presented today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, if y'all are ready, I think that brings us to our end Q&A segment here, where I just get to relentlessly pepper you with all of the animation questions from chat. So if you're ready for that, I am.
Let's go.
All right, fantastic. So how this will work, obviously, if any of you want to come in and answer any part of this question, work together on it, please feel free. I'll just ask the questions to all of you, and then whoever wants to have a stab at it, then please feel free. Also, for anyone who's curious as to why Greg is not here in the Q&A segment, he had to go. So, as That sounded a lot more ominous than I actually intended it to be. He had something else he needed to go do. He had to go. All right, he's out of here. He's gone.
He's a busy
But
guy. He's still very much alive.
yeah, everyone's saying RIP Greg in chat. It's Greg is fine. Okay, Greg is fine, I assure you. But a big thank you to Greg for coming on and walking through those great demos that he did. So, all right, first question I've got for y'all. Someone said in Unreal Engine, there are at least 3 ways to do IK. One in Control Rig, another in the IK asset, and you can also do it from the animation blueprint. Is one more optimal than the other, or are they just options that adapt to the developer's tastes?
Yeah, I can take that one. So it's partly it's a mix of different requirements in different contexts and some legacy stuff as well. The anim node IK is it's like highly optimized. It's very simple. It's meant to be doing those little bits of procedural IK, usually to like snap a hand to a weapon or something that you want it, that they come up all the time in a runtime scenario. Control rig IK, for obvious reasons, having IK right in control rig is just super useful because it's like the bread and butter of most rigs, and it's there to be procedurally managed with whatever crazy machinery you want to come up with. And then in the case of the IK rig, the idea there is that it's primarily a home for the IK that you would use in the context of retargeting. So the IK retargeter, as the name suggests, will do an IK pass at the end, optionally. And it can be used to, for example, snap hands or legs, or feet rather, to the locations that are coming in from the input animation. So this is how you would take animation between 2 characters of differing proportions and make absolutely sure that their feet are not sliding when you transfer the animation over. So it actually shares the underlying solvers with control rig, IK rig, and the anim node. Like they all share the same solver code under the hood. So it's really just a matter of the UX that we put on top of it to allow you to tune it for whatever context you need it. So the question of like which one should you use, it's just whatever's appropriate for the task at hand. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a way to add a curve float inside control rig, or even better yet, a way to add a lookup table?
Ooh, so but there's a bunch of different ways of doing it. You have access to the curves that are defined in the skeleton. You can add variables of type float that may drive your rig. If you want to return data out, there's something called animation attributes, which is basically a table that flows through a whole animation system where every single node has access to it. So, one rig can leave data like a bunch of floats or something like that, or transforms. There's a lot of different types that be supported, and they can be picked up by systems later in the pipeline. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. There's a variety of ways of setting up curves.
Very nice. Do you plan to support pens with pressure sensitivity for painting maps and weights? I think that's the biggest thing that I personally would miss coming from my DCC.
Oh, cool. That's good to know. It's kind of roughed in some places in the engine, support for pens, but not fully finished. So certainly that is something that we want to support. I wouldn't expect it in the next release, unfortunately.
Very, very cool. Next question here is, can you bind hotkeys to all of these buttons in modeling and rigging tools, or do you have to go through the manual dropdowns?
I can take this one again. So there is actually a huge effort right now within the UX team, and call out to them because they're doing great work there, trying to consolidate hotkeys across the engine, because right now it's kind of the Wild West. Like there's hotkeys come and go depending on the context. It's not clear which ones are available at which time, and there's no real central repository where they can all be adjusted. And so we do want to centralize them, make it clear which are available in which context, and provide more of them, frankly, for all the various tools, and also consolidate them, because there's sometimes where, you know, roughly the same operation in different contexts will have different hotkeys. So frankly, it's a bit of a mess right now, and we're working on it. Is the brutal honest truth.
It's a work in progress, okay?
Yeah.
It's all good. All right. Next question here is, how can I use control rig in montage if I want to?
Oh, that's a question for Greg. Greg?
Greg, what do you say, Greg?
So I don't actually know. Give Greg a thought already. Maybe we can record the question and get back to it later. Is that possible?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Then next up after that is, does the bone orientation make a difference to modular rig? In some cases, I would add the rig to a limb and it would twist.
Okay, you want to take that one? I mean,
it sounds like that's the answer right there, right? So yes, it does. So yeah, absolutely. There's certain expectations that any module will have, and yeah, you can add parameters to it. So you can say like, I can configure what my maybe expected primary axis is or something like that. But if they're completely misaligned, then there's no way you can recover from that, right? So most of all modules have configuration about the primary axis, but there's certain expectations that along a chain it's going to be X. And if it's slightly off, then other computations may be completely giving you wrong results, like twisting IK or pole vectors being in the wrong place and all sorts of other stuff. So yes, it always matters.
So is there a way, so yeah, sorry, a user could duplicate one of the modules we ship and then change it so it can like handle those cases?
Yeah, absolutely. So sure, you can take any of the modules, you can duplicate the assets out of the content plugin that we ship with called control rig modules, copy it out there, open it up, change it, look at how it's built, right? Yeah, it may be worth like considering to focus only on building modules, either in another live stream or a different format, because it's very useful, and I don't think the documentation we have yet, there's a tutorial there, but it's not very broad. So maybe we should spend some time more there to explain to people how to build them, because yeah, like you say, Benoit, they're a starting point, but by no means we're trying to cover all cases with the stuff we ship. We know that people will have to build modules for their particular the situations they're in.
For sure. All right. This next question may also be a Greg question. We'll see.
It's easy out.
Yeah. Do modular rigs work fine with layered control rigs, or are there caveats?
I believe Greg was actually showing it in the demo. They work as long as all the modules you're using support the backward solve. So the way this works is that the rig runs through an event called the backward solve, where it figures out where the controls needs to be based on the input animation. And modular rigs do the same thing. It's just that each of the modules has to do that job. And if one of the modules doesn't implement backward solve, it's not going to work. So the good news is you typically build modules rarely, but you use them often. So you have to put that work in to get it working once, and then you're fine. And then from then on out, you can use layer control rigs, and also baking to it. And there's many other systems that rely on the backward solve.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, so for this next one, I'm gonna read this question exactly as it's written, word for word, because I'll admit that I myself as an individual have no idea what this is even referencing. So I'm just putting that out there before we get into this one. All right. Are there plans to increase the execution stack limit of rig VM to greater than 65,535 instructions capped by INT 16? Or when using modular components, is it still limited by this instruction set max cap?
Wow. So kudos
I want to see
to
your
the
rig.
person. So first of all, how did you figure out that that's the limit, other than looking at C++? So no, actually. So it's no longer limited by that. Well, each VM is, but a member of the team has spent a serious amount of time optimizing the cost that is there when you run a single VM. So when you call a VM and execute a single execution stack, so that if you have a modular rig where you have many different VMs, where each one has its own, can run efficiently, right? And there's another future-facing set of features that we're building that rely on the same tech, which is why we invested heavily in optimizing it. So now the cost is really low, and you can focus on building smaller rigs. That yes, each one is going to have that stack limit, but because you're only going to build an ARM, you're not going to build the whole biped in one VM. It should be serviceable, right? That being said, I'm curious how you're hitting the limit already. Like, we have some rigs that have like 4,000 or 5,000 rig instructions, and they're massive graphs. So I'm sure, like, yeah, you probably use a lot of functions, a lot of nesting, and you can hit that limit. Which is why, again, like we're thinking about breaking it up and making it easier. We may hit the limit internally, so if you have access to UDN, feel free to file a ticket or a conversation so we can start to see like where that limit is being hit and what we can do to help you if that's, because even with modular rigs there may still be a need. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. Modular rigs make it certainly happen less often, I'd say.
Yeah, I definitely have a request of I would like somebody to take a screenshot of said rig. And Dan, if you could just throw our lower thirds up real quick, just like tag those of us with our socials on here, because I am also curious what this rig would look like.
Oh, every system has the spaghetti graphs of madness. Any graph system, there's people that will share. And it's cool. It's like, I think it's awesome that people are pushing it to that limit. My gut feeling is, and I'm curious if that could be added to the comments, it's probably a generated graph. I've seen people build like Python scripts that build graphs off of some external description, and they tend to become really big. So if you're doing that, again, kudos. But the long question, I've had these discussions in the past, is replicating external graph using a Python script. Yes, you can do that in Control Rig. Is that the most effective way of doing it? Maybe not. I don't know. But it's worth, again, if you have access to UDN, let's have a discussion and maybe we can push this forward.
Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Moving on. So if you create a custom module, such as something like a jaw control, do you get backwards solve for those modules as well?
You get it if you build it.
This was in reference to the shark.
Unfortunately, yeah. So you get it if you build it, right? So the good news is that it's going to be simpler to build. As the problem you're facing is smaller, you're just focusing on the jaw. Maybe something like the hinge that I built with a bit more control. If it's a mechanical jaw, if it's a biological, it will be quite different. Usually, the backward solve is also much simpler to build because you're going to have a smaller set of bones and a smaller set of controls that you're dealing with. So it's more manageable, but you still have to build it. The good news is that my experience has been people tend to build rigs first monolithically because that's the only tool they had available until this release. And then you're going to look at that rig and you take it apart and you try to build modules out of what you've already built. And then as you do that, you parameterize them and make them more generics that can be used in more situations. But it's a process. It's a learning process. Like eventually you're going to end up with modules that are quite generic and that you can use across characters for different use cases, right? And as you do that, you're going to learn that the backward solve is actually not that daunting. I mean, yes, you have to build it, but the good news is with modules, you only have to build it once for the module, and then it comes for free.
Very nice. For the chain dynamics, can I also bake those animations?
Yeah, you can bake any animation result. That's the good news for sequencer. You can bake anything you see that's moving, you can bake it.
Yeah, like you should almost think of the sequencer as your source animation, and you're almost certainly, if you're going to use that in a runtime situation, you'd bake that down to an animation sequence, and it would be just like any other. But so your level sequence would just be a raw thing that you use for working on.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. All right, I have, let's see here. 2 more questions, and then I have my final trick question that I always save for all of my guests and I never tell you about because I'm evil. I don't know. So we're almost there. First up here is, when using a control rig and sequencer, is there a way to switch smoothly between FK and IK when creating an animation? Or is that a Greg question? Did I just toss another Greg question at you?
So I believe the modules and the rigs that we ship, they have a hard switch, I believe. So they require you to do a pre-frame, post-frame, or current frame key. but you can certainly build it to be blendable. I don't think right now that it's just the rigs that we built. I'm not 100% sure. I think the mannequin rigs that we have, they have a hard switch, so they can't do it. But you could absolutely build it with a weight and then make it blendable. Is that, Kieran, does that make sense? Like, because we have the two solves and we're
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
switching between the solution. We just don't blend them. So if you build a rig with a float rather than a boolean, it should be fine.
And the switch is currently a hard one.
All right. Very good. Then last question from chat we're going to take for now is, when it comes to learning about modular rig, control rig, and all of these new resources that you've demoed today, do you recommend us digging in and reverse engineering through the examples that you have given us? Or do you think it's better to start with tutorials if we're trying to get our feet wet?
So what I've seen people do, which is really successful, you can sort of tell by the list of questions that happen, it tends to be sort of surface level down. So I'd recommend, if you haven't used any of these tools, take the control rig examples project and put an existing rig into sequencer and try to keyframe the guy to sit on the floor, right? Like something to start there. Don't dig into the rig. Don't worry about layer control rigs or anything like that. And then sort of work your way backwards. So don't start with the nodes and control rig and try to come up with a biped. But look at like animate first, get a sensation of that animation is fun, and sort of, and then if you need to, really only if you need to dig in, right? I feel like you shouldn't dig in for the sake of it. It feels like when you get to a point where the rig isn't doing what you need and there's a control you're missing, take one of the rigs we built, copy and paste it, and build one that's slightly different, and so on. And eventually you're going to build your own modules and you'll become very technical. And maybe you never, because you don't care about it. It's fine. It's like to just use what you need. We're trying to give you examples where you can sort of get your toes wet if you really want to. And all this stuff is meant to be opened up and broken and, put back together as needed.
All right. Very nice. All right,
Anything to add
y'all.
there, Kieran or Benoit, or I feel like I'm bulldozing everyone.
No,
Like,
that's
how
okay.
do you feel like, how would you go about learning these things?
Yeah, I would take the same approach, and I would also highlight that the community around control rig is really active, and there are a lot of tiny tutorials from how you switch from other DTCs and now what's the different approach of rigging with control rig compared to any other DCC. So people tried to explain how you would do that in Maya and now how you would do this in control rig. So you can have like tiny examples you could find here and there trying to explain this. And as Sergey mentioned, I mean, some of our examples are probably too huge to dig into them right at the first attempt. But
yeah, I think community is a good
learning tutorials.
Sorry, Benoit.
Go ahead.
I feel like the community is, sometimes I've underestimated or I don't really mention it, but it's a huge resource. Like, for example, shout out to Thomas Bittner, who's building a rig builder for the different DCCs and control rigs. So he's working on synchronizing rig building in different packages so that you have continuous workflows and sort of ability of round tripping animation. So it's a huge effort. But the cool thing is it's very openly communicated how it's done and how challenges that he's facing and all that stuff is like very much like if you're learning about the tools at the same time, you can learn a lot from those things. And many people are doing that, discussing workflows. This also to say, if you are a rigger like pro or semi-pro in another package like Houdini or Maya, our approaches in certain areas are quite different, and it takes a while to sort of become, so to say, very efficient with them. I think people can get running fast, but to get like the most out of it, it requires rethinking certain areas. And I found the community there is especially rewarding because people like sort of share those key moments when there's like, oh, now this is how I'm doing it differently now compared to Maya, Houdini, or Blender, right? And I found those are the key moments where people, when they struggle to get to that point, they see that it's not only me, everybody's sort of going through this paradigm shift and the challenges that come with that. So I feel like, yeah, point to different socials and where people are discussing this is really important.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, with that, y'all, then I have my final question for you. This one is my own selfish question. And it is, out of everything that you have demoed today, everything that you've talked about, what are you most looking forward to to seeing people trying to experiment or create with these tools.
I can go first on that one. I think what Greg demonstrated with layered control rigs, in my mind, it represents a departure from almost a complete departure from how you would approach rigging in the past, where you'd build these Uber rigs that have all the features in this one big thing, and it's kind of hard to maintain. And so it's like you have to rethink how rigging works and start breaking things up into task-specific rigs. And then when you combine that with a modular rig where those individual task-specific rigs are now more or less automated, we're heading towards a future where people are going to be assembling animations, I think, at an incredible rate. Like the net result of all the work that we're showing here today is that we're improving the efficiency with which people can make motion for their game, film, TV, whatever. And so I'm most looking forward to, 2-3 releases down the road when this tool set's matured and people are familiarized with it. And frankly, like our games and films and TV are going to start showing. Like there'll be smaller teams batting way beyond what they could do before. Mm-hmm. And as a consumer of games, I like that.
Absolutely. All right. I have to hand it off to both you, Benoit and Helgi. You can't get out of it. I refuse to let you just give it to Kieran.
Yeah, I would say the same. I mean, make the most of UE and try to create mixed experiences. So that's the game engine. Then we opened a lot of skinning, animation capabilities on top of that, but then you can create something new. The idea is not to use like UE just for linear content or just for games, but try to create new experiences, mixing everything together. And this is the way we try to build our character workflow. I mean, animation and character workflow, so that all those pieces come together so that you can create something new that you can do anywhere else, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd say for me, what's the most exciting? I'm not sure. I mean, the truth is, what's really, I mean, the whole, like Kieran Benoit was saying that this whole tool set coming together and these different areas of the animation group, the results working together so well is really exciting and all that. But to be honest, the one thing that excites me most is sort of the outliers, is when people, because we've built now the modular rigs, for example, we've built a system where you have access to the whole hierarchy in a module and you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. And I know that, yeah, we've demoed an arm is an arm and this is how it's supposed to be, but there's going to be people that built like insane combinatorial things out of this that we're not yet anticipating. And I'm not going to disclose what they are, but there are features in the animation system that came out of those, like those things where it's like, what the hell are people doing with this? This is not what it's supposed to be used for. And then you realize, oh, that's actually really cool. And maybe this is what we should be targeting, right? So this is what excites me about this, is that this is a bit of a sort of a, yeah, I don't know if I should say Lego, but it's certainly a playground of different things that you can experiment with and put together and see what they're used for. And I think the unanticipated is always what makes it most enjoyable for me, and stressful. Like, to be honest, sometimes, but it's cool. It's like I'm looking forward to it.
Artists have no boundaries at all, so they use what they have to create crazy things.
Yeah, I do love the idea of y'all just getting requests occasionally, and just kind of sitting there for a second, like, why are you even using it this way? Wait, what?
Well, we already had one in the questions. Like, why is there a limit on like 65,000 instructions? Like, what? All right. I really would like to learn about this. Like, what is going on, right? So it's cool. It's like there's going to be a use for this, and maybe the limit has to be higher now. Like, that's okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the things that I enjoy the most. But yeah, they also sometimes, when you come in the morning, the first email you open is like that. It's like, what is happening? But yeah, it's really fun. That's I guess the colorful side of this industry, and the fact that we're looking at people building games and TV and films. It's very different requirements and very different mindsets. So it's really quite enjoyable to see what the needs that people come up with.
Yeah.
The stuff people do with the retargeter, like there was a guy that bent the mannequin down backwards and then retargeted spider animation onto him. So stop that. That's illegal. We're not allowed to do that with the retargeter anymore.
Yeah, we've seen in UEFN, for example, we've seen that control rig is available on a component, and so I guess what I was saying this in the live stream, I'm advertising for it, but it's one of those things where we didn't build control for this, but apparently you can do all sorts of cool logic with it. So it's one of those things where it's quite enjoyable to see that people are building game logic and all sorts of stuff, right? With the graph that was meant for computing poses. It's one of those things where I think it's both really awesome and stressful for us sometimes, but it's what you have to deal with the creative community that is presented tools that come up with uses for them. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming on today and taking the time to walk through all of these incredible tools, show us all of these great demos, give us tons of knowledge. And there's so much available here. So for anybody who is watching, if you may have missed any part of the stream, don't worry, because all of our streams are posted in video format that can be viewed on demand on both our Twitch and YouTube channel at Unreal Engine. Also, if you're interested in keeping up with the latest news, as well as just general goings on, learning about events, all that good things, you can do so on all of our socials, which is also at Unreal Engine. And last but certainly not least, if you have not already, you should go and check out the Epic developer community, where we have a collection of resources, we have our forums, we have our documentation, we have just about anything you could ever possibly need in regards to the engine and information around it. So make sure you go check that out, get all that good information that you possibly can. But one last big thank you, of course, to our fantastic guests and the time that you have spent here. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having us.
It was a lot of fun.
Of course.
Thank you.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
All right. With that, we'll see all the rest of y'all later. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.